Assalamualaikum listeners. Before we start the show, I wanted to remind you guys of a very, very exclusive offer, which is essentially our Patreon WhatsApp Boys in the Cave chat that, mashallah, like, alhamdulillah, I think it's probably one of the best WhatsApp threads you can be on in history, to be honest, because like the amount of, mashallah, like knowledgeable people that are there, because we do add our guests from the show onto that chat, as well as our very insightful listeners that are Patreon members who are on the chat as well. You know, there's mashallah, very amazing discussions happen. So we have the sort of guests that we do have on the Patreon WhatsApp chat is the likes of Dr. Jonathan Brown, Asadullah Ali, Dr. Samir Mahmood, Tariq Tamar. We also have the likes of, Mohammed Taba, Mohammed Ishaq, and many, many others as well. So you definitely don't want to miss out such an opportunity. So we have even sheikhs on it, like Sheikh Omar Baloch, Sheikh Osta, for example. So you definitely don't want to miss this opportunity to be in the same chat as such wonderful thinkers and brilliant minds and the sort of discussions that we have. So if you want to be part of the inside conversations, definitely join our Patreon page, $5 Patreon tire. Inshallah, you can join us in the WhatsApp group. So all you have to do is go patreon.com/boysinthecave. It's $5 Patreon tire. And at the same time, you're also benefiting our project to keep on going smoothly, and at the same time also better our production quality, and inshallah we can improve better and then think about going into video, and that can only be done through your help. So inshallah, I hope people jump onto that and look into that, and also at the same time benefit BITC. So thanks for that, and I'll get into the show inshallah. So hope you enjoy the show.
The clock here now, so we've been up for a couple of hours. We've been really keen.
8 a.m.
Yeah, 8 a.m. Yeah.
Australia is different. Australia really is like another world.
Oh man, it's you really get that sense. Just fly here one day, man. When you're here for you lose a whole day of your life pretty much just on the plane.
I don't think I'm gonna do that, but yeah, maybe one day.
Yeah, everyone says that. Inshallah we'll come to Australia.
Inshallah,
it's like, why would you come to Australia though? It's so far out of the way. Get a look at a few kangaroos.
Literally, when I think of Australia, I just think of like wild animals, like coming to beat me up or something.
Oh, that's my favorite thing to do with British tourists, because I work at a little like convenience store next to a hotel, so I get like the fresh tourists when they just get to their hotel, they come grab a feed, and I'm like, oh man, just keep an eye out. So if you see a spider that's black, make sure you run the other way, but the black one specifically, about this size. And I'm like, they come like, sometimes they come up the toilet, sometimes they're in the drains.
That's what I've heard, but that one scares me.
I'm just like, make sure you check before you sit. Make sure you have a look in your shower, and they're just terrified. Honestly, they start quivering.
You're not really selling it. You're not really selling it. Where are you?
Bro, it's like, it's so weird. It's because like every time I'm like on Facebook or something, and it's like 20 things Australia's famous about, it's all like terrible, like rattlesnakes and like kangaroos like jumping on cars.
Bro, the top 10 deadliest snakes in the world are all in Australia. Like you can read about like cobras and that. Be like, oh yeah, cobras are deadly. I'm like, nah, mate. I actually pulled a snake out of our backyard that was like 10 times more deadly than a cobra.
Wow.
But it's so funny when I was overseas, people would like sort of see me and they'd be like, wait, you're Australian? I thought Australians would have been tough. Because they're like, I'm just not the expectation.
But like, I know, like, bro, in like compared to like UK, it seems like, I don't know, like, it seems a bit more like chill, I guess, the vibe in general. You don't have to deal with like lethal sort of,
You got to deal with like 60 million people in a small space, though. That's the thing.
Yeah, and the weather as well.
The weather's terrible. Like the weather's terrible. You're right. That's true. The weather's absolutely terrible. But other than that, I mean, I love the UK, man.
Whereabouts do you live?
So I grew up in London, but now I live in Birmingham, which is like the second city. Which
of course.
You probably heard of Birmingham Sharif.
Yeah, of course. It's I think it's like
the fourth holiest city in Islam.
I remember watching Man Like Mobbing.
Yeah.
Have you seen that? Yeah, that was fantastic. I mean, I needed subtitles. I couldn't understand everything that they were saying.
Yeah, the Birmingham accent.
The Brummie accent, man. It's a tough one, but
I mean, saying that as an Australian accent, it's equally as funny.
I know, bro. Like it was so funny. Like the other day, I saw a comment. Some guy was like, love your podcast, this, that, but sometimes I don't understand what you're saying, so I gotta listen to it again. I'm like, oh, I didn't even know it was that bad.
You just really like. You should just go all out like Crocodile Dundee. Just crank up the Australian accent just one day. Like someone's like,
go hard,
"Gag, what? How you going?"
Get like a redneck from the bushes, just to like mess with people.
That'll be epic. That'll be epic.
What time is it though now there? I actually have no idea. So it's 8 here, and it would be like
11:13 on Monday. So what are you on? You're Tuesday now, yeah? 8 a.m. in the morning?
Yeah, it's tomorrow, man.
Wow, yeah.
But like we sort of record in our own sort of. I'm not like we have a masjid that gives us a bit of space, so we had to like drive. We drive at like a pickup, Rafael, and we head off. So we have like early morning essentially here. You know what I mean? But I just by the way, we're recording, so you're cool with that, inshallah, yeah?
Yeah, of course.
Like chill vibe.
Yeah.
All right, bismillah. So
he has to change completely into his like podcast. Like he has himself, and then he has his podcast voice, and just switches on halfway through.
Speaking about your podcast, like I know you started up recently, and mashallah, like I really enjoyed the fact that you touch on sort of your personal experiences as well, which is a bit crazy as well. Like me and Rafael were just like discussing that. So maybe if you could just give the audience a sort of idea of what your podcast's about and what you look to cover there. It's called the Malcolm Effect, yeah?
Yeah, so basically what it was is, previously we had done something called the Baraka Boys podcast, and that was like touching on somewhat the experiences of young Muslims in the UK, particularly in the West, and how how we kind of see Islam, and how we kind of practice our faith, kind of merging our kind of different cultures, being a young Muslim in the West, and kind of merging that with our Islam, and that was alhamdulillah a huge success. So from there we kind of said, from there everyone's doing their own individual projects. So some people are into music, some people are into like public speaking, some people are doing business. So I want to launch something where it kind of just told my perspective on things basically, and not just solely Islamic stuff. Obviously as well there will be Islamic stuff in there, but mainly just kind of like social commentary, what I thought about different things. So yeah, alhamdulillah, so far been a big success. Well, so far so good, alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. Like for me, I'm actually because I knew about you before, because I was like, I watched the Baraka Boys podcast from like way back when you guys like first sort of started out, and I've got to admit, bro, like the sort of podcast setup that you have and the sort of discussions that you did have on the show was very unique in the sense that it's very relatable and it's very chill, and it's a sort of Islam that you can kind of relate to, and then you sprinkle in like aspects of deen and trying to be better as a human being, and it's really raw as well, which is, I guess, because I had chats with other people who do other podcasts, and one of the things, like even for us, bro, like when we do this podcast, like sometimes we put it on the front, like some people think like, oh, we're full like mashallah religious, this, that, like we try to be, but we're human at the end of the day, right? But essentially with that podcast, it was so much more relatable. And mashallah, I know all of you guys are doing your own thing as well, like for yourself, like, studying Al-Azhar and sort of activism as well. So it's really good to see, like you guys branching out, doing your own things at the same time as well.
Yeah, and I think, alhamdulillah, I think that was the point. I feel like so many of us young people, we see, it's like if you look historically, and you think of scholars and their works, and undoubtedly scholars were very, many scholars were kind of like religious, obviously, but we only have access to scholars through their books. And naturally, you and I will, like, let's take it as the podcast as an analogy. As on a podcast, you're going to put your professional voice on, or your professional demeanor on, yeah? You can imagine as well, these scholars wrote in their professional way. So the only access we have to scholars, other than when they wrote diaries and stuff, is them being as professional, them being as super religious. So we never really learned, like, they were religious, but they were still human beings. Like, what was their banter like? What was their interaction like with different people? So we kind of thought, you know what? I'm sure so many people can relate to just being a young Muslim, especially in the West, and the struggles that we go through. So we thought, you know what, we're going to be as honest as possible in that podcast. And that's what it turned out to be. And it found out, lo and behold, many people could relate to it.
Yeah, I think it's the idea of like having that dichotomy between what people would imagine a religious persona to be, and then like a cultural or like contextual kind of persona like that you would have with your friends. But in reality, there shouldn't exist a two different thing. Like you can have your faith and you can be, deeply pious or practicing,
you can be yourself.
Or want to study and be yourself as well. There's no contradiction there. And I think that's what I really found inspiring and interesting from the podcast that we listened to.
Yeah, the first one with Malcolm Effect. So we'll listen to that. Me and Rafael will listen to together, and you'll like really roar about even the background, the sort of stuff you went through.
Childhood as well.
So yeah, mashallah, like it's very inspiring, man. Straight up, bro. And even like, I know you touched on like your personal sort of when you were younger, but then mashallah, you know, to where you are now in terms of like going to Al-Azhar, studying there as well, and being a sort of face in your community. How's that journey been like? Like, how can you maybe walk us through sort of your journey personally?
Yeah, I mean, so obviously I've mentioned this on the podcast, but just to kind of reiterate it. Basically, yeah, so about 16, 17, I started practicing Islam. I, became what will be known as a Salafi, because naturally I feel like, the progression to becoming a Salafi is quite a natural progression, because you see the Salafi approach as almost a way of redeeming yourself, because you feel like, oh my God, how can God accept me? I've done so much bad stuff. Oh my God, I'm not a good person. Therefore, I have to go to the opposite, what you deem to be extreme. You have to go to another extreme and be like, let me completely, have this thing of redemption. So then, I became a Salafi for like less than a year. It didn't really resonate with me, and I felt like, wow, like I'm not being myself at all. And alongside not being yourself, I felt like I was just religiously pretending. So like, you throwing all the Arabic terms that you do, you start adopting an Arabic accent in when you speak. You start wearing clothes that you don't really want to wear, but you think this is the thing to do. I remember I mentioned on the podcast, like I deleted all the girls off my social media. I'm like, you know what, like, this everything's haram. I stopped listening to music, and I stopped listening to music, and I thought all these things I have to, like, this is what it means to be a Muslim. But then slowly started like, I had a lot of questions to do with like, okay, what does this mean? Why do people do this? And the response was, and it got to a point where people was like, oh, stop questioning. Like, you have to stop questioning. This is not, this is what led Bani Israel to destruction. Too many questions. So I was like, okay, silly, adios kind of thing. This doesn't really sit with me. So I started finding different teachers, different ways of looking at things. And I thought, this kind of Islam makes more sense to me. So I thought, you know what? And particularly I fell in love with fiqh. That was like my entry point to me studying Islam. I was like, you know what, I love fiqh. I love learning about difference of opinion. And I thought, you know what, there's no way a 1400-year legacy could be contained in the interpretation of one or two scholars. And unfortunately, this is what I found the Salafi approach gave. It kind of constrained Islam to the approach and the verification of a few scholars. And I thought, this doesn't really make sense. I know what people are like, and people are multifaceted, they're diverse. So I find that the tradition of like the madhahib, the madhabs, kind of for me represented what I kind of felt Islam should be like with its diversity. So then I thought, okay, let me study the Maliki. Then I remember coming home one day, I asked my parents, what madhab are we? They're like, we're Maliki. I was like, oh, I didn't know that. I said, why are we Maliki? They're because, Maliki madhab is the predominant madhab in West Africa, where I'm from, Gambia and Senegal. So I thought, okay, cool. I'm Maliki then. I didn't know what that meant, but I said, I'm Maliki now. Then, start YouTubing Maliki Sheikhs, Sheikh Hamza Yusuf comes up, and all the different shiur comes up. So I started studying. I found local teachers in Birmingham, particularly Mufti Abu Layth, another teacher called Sheikh Muhammad Iqbal. I started studying fiqh with them. And I thought, okay, this is all well and good, but I need to immerse myself into that. So I finished uni in 2015. I did my law degree. And then I went to Egypt, spent 2 years learning Arabic. I applied for Azhar. I completed the Azhar program high school, and then I applied for the Azhar Mosque. So in Egypt, you have Azhar University and Azhar Mosque. Azhar University is to do with, like, you get a degree at the end of it, and in the mosque, you get an ijazah from Azhar. So I opted for the Azhar Mosque route. And yes, I've just been there ever since. I've finished most of my levels now. I've got several ijazahs from the mosque as well, in different books and different subjects as well. So I've got a couple of years left, but mainly I focus on that, as well as, to be fair, you can't just do Azhar. No one will go to Azhar and come out a scholar, contrary to popular belief. You have to supplement your learning heavy with private lessons. Alhamdulillah, Egypt has an abundance of several teachers who are teaching privately books. So for example, I study with a place called Markaz Imam Malik, which is headed by a teacher from Algeria called Sheikh Zuhair. And he's very traditional in his approach, but I get all traditional books and backing from him, as well as several other teachers.
Mashallah, that's mashallah. That's quite some journey. And you mentioned like this sort of just to touch on the whole point of like Salafism and stuff. It's interesting because it's so, I guess, prominent. Like there are sort of mashallah, like in the sense of taking the good out of the sort of approach to Islam that they had. I guess, you know, for like looking back at my sort of Salafi days, I guess what I can say is a lot of people with their sort of how they are in terms of personality and their sort of mindset vibe with the whole sort of Salafi approach to things. Like it's more, you know, beat down, essentially more straight to the point. And I guess it vibes with more people because here in Sydney, there's a big sort of Arab slash, you know, Lebanese sort of community. So it sort of vibes with them. Like, I don't know if you're familiar. I think in UK, like Mohammed Hoblos is very famous.
Yes.
So like, yeah, Hoblos is from Sydney. So you know what I mean? Like his style of khutbah, he's more associated with the Salafi sort of way of doing things. So it sort of vibes with.
Yeah, it's like appeals to people who like necessarily like I can't grab some people from Western Sydney, for example, in our area and just show them a Tim Winter video and expect them to be like,
or like a Hamza.
Yeah. It's gonna, you know what we're saying?
Freak out, like so it has its place, but then I guess for when it like. Same thing with me and as you mentioned for yourself is where, you know, when you're more curious and you want to start knowing things a bit more deeper and you understand like there's more nuanced discussions to these questions, especially like, you know, Madhab's the common one, but there's so many other discussions.
It's 1400 years of tradition that is basically glossed over or swept aside.
Like
in a lot of
the awliya is like one another example where,
you
know, it's
cultural diversity even is something that, you know, I want to touch on a bit more, but that's something that's even kind of not really present or talked about in the Salafi kind of discourse, you know, the idea of like indigenous Islamic expressions and traditions.
Exactly.
Is it same thing at UK, I guess?
100%. I mean, the thing is, Salafism a lot of time in the UK is kind of associated and understandably associated, and I think probably the same as you mentioned in Sydney. It's basically that I think, you know, when I say roadmen, do you know what that means?
Not really, no.
Okay, so a roadman is someone who's usually either still involved or just left a life of crime many a times. And then again, it's the same thing that people go through. They want something to be they want to be redeemed. They want to feel like they can be redeemed, and the Salafism offers that redemption. That, you know, okay, you've done all this bad in your life to be redeemed and for God to accept you. This is the way you must be, and it's very like, you know, it's very cutthroat. It's very easy, and it sounds very appealing. I understand. I taught, like, again, not to diss. I don't want to diss any groups. I'm not into sectarianism or kind of, you know, sectarian polemics. It's simply that kind of dialectic really appeals to people, and it makes sense. Why? Just listen. Don't give me Malik, don't give me Shafi'i, don't give me Ahmed. Why you give me all these mandem for? Just give me Quran and Sunnah. And of course it makes it appeals, isn't it? Like, you know, okay, just give me Quran and Sunnah. Of course it does. I understand why. And then you know, it's like, okay, yeah, I just want to go straight to Quran and Sunnah. God speaks to me, therefore I should go straight to God and his messenger. Why do I need to go to anyone else? But the problem is with that, what they don't tell you is that, yes, that is true in what you're saying, but it's like, you know, the famous statement of Sayyidina Ali, you know, kalimatul haqq wa yuridu biha batil. Like, you know, it's a statement of truth, but what you mean by it is falsehood. Because yes, it's true. Yes, we follow the Quran and Sunnah. No sane Muslim would say that I don't follow the Quran and Sunnah, or I want to reject the Quran and Sunnah. But however, what they don't tell you is that even their interpretation of Quran and Sunnah is being interpreted. Even their understanding is being interpreted. Sorry. Yeah,
it's a madhab of sorts in itself, like
100%.
Sort of. I wanted to mention what I touched upon and ask you a bit more about it. But when you started to sort of come out of that understanding in particular and move in towards the more traditional understanding, was that also coupled with a kind of exploration of your own cultural and family background as well, and the history of West Africa?
Yes, at the same time, but more a bit later as well. The more I got into the Maliki Madhab, I started going to Morocco a lot. I've been to Morocco like several times. And I was like, oh wow, like there's a whole, like, you know, you can see a mosque where everyone's praying in Sadl as a Maliki. That's, you know, hands to your side, and you're like, wow. And the Imam's only doing one salam, and, you know, all these things. You're like, oh wow, this actually, like, so the stuff I was learning in the books, I'm seeing it in practice. And, you know, many times you go to some places today and you pray with Sadl, people think you're a Shia. Or you go to, or you do one salam, people think, what the hell, where's the second salam, you know? But this is a whole madhab and a whole tradition. So when I went to Senegal, in West Africa, when I went to Morocco as well, I'm like, okay, wow, this is the tradition that I've learned, and it is a living tradition that still exists.
It is, and it's something that I think is actually unfortunately, and I was talking to Tanzim about
we
this
always
before.
talk about this, man.
I think I'm very passionate about it. I think that not enough Muslims actually know about the history of West Africa. Like most Muslims will be able to talk a little bit about the Mughals in the subcontinental part of things. The Arab conquerors, Salahuddin al-Ayyubi. But some of the great ulama and some of the great warriors of the West African tradition, like Usman Dan Fodio in like Nigeria.
Exactly.
And what's the name of the one who led the jihad, the Fulani who led the jihad in the highlands? Futator, what's his name?
Momodou Taal.
I think, yeah, that's the and the
that's my great.
I think that you were, that was what I was gonna say. I think that was your descendant from, mashallah. But like no one knows about that. And then even more recently, people have given him the title Shaykh al-Islam Ibrahim Niasse as well.
Sheikh Ibrahim Niasse,
who like bought. There are estimates that millions of people actually converted as a result of his da'wah.
Yeah, 100%.
So do you feel like this is something that, because as I said, I'm very passionate about that and studying it and feeling like Muslims should really know, because it's been such a sort of vibrant scene of Muslim kind of expression in the last few hundred years in particular, and even today.
I feel like it's definitely been. I wouldn't say, I don't want to, there's not like some deliberate plan to hide it. I just think people just haven't been exposed to it. And I think that's fair, and that's why there is work now, like, the work of Dr. Rudolph Ware's put out amazing books. And the thing is, the West African tradition of scholarship, it's so rich. People don't, I think it's actually, it's just a shame that we haven't been exposed to it. Like some of the first fatwa deeming slavery haram was by Ahmed Baba, who was a West African scholar from Mali. Some of the first fatwa on suicide being haram, for example. Not some of the first fatwa, but like suicide being haram, for example. Some of the scholars in West Africa, when the French colonialists came in, they deemed it haram to fight against the French colonialists, because they said that we don't have the weaponry that they have, and going to fight them is just suicide, and therefore suicide is haram. Therefore, making the fight against them, the colonialists, is going to be haram. Therefore, we have to work with them. So many amazing fatwa like this and then even have correspondence between Momodou Taal and Ashraf Ali Tanvi from the Deoband school. So you have correspondence. Yeah, Ashraf Ali Tanvi wrote to Momodou Taal to get some advice on a mas'ala to do with divorce. And there was that correspondence. Then you have the West African who was a nephew or great nephew of Sheikh Momodou Taal. He was the Mufti of Medina, Mufti Al-Fahashim Taal. He was the Mufti of the Maliki in Medina, a West African scholar, not less than 200 years ago. So all these things that, it's such a rich tradition that we haven't been exposed to. But alhamdulillah, I'm glad that there have been, concerted efforts to kind of bring that tradition out.
Well, that's actually the way I came across it, was through studying. I'm Maliki as well, so studying a little bit of Maliki Fiqh.
Alhamdulillah.
And alhamdulillah. But it's not so much as the history has been swept under the carpet. It's more like the Maliki Madhab just doesn't exist really amongst the lay people these days, like you were saying.
Yes.
Especially in the UK and even in Australia. If you pray according to the mashhur of the madhab, which is sadal, then like you're gonna cop it, man. Like someone's gonna come beat you after the salah.
Exactly. I mean,
I was just mentioning, like, me and Raf sometimes at Jummah I try to like act like I don't know him. So if he's praying next to me and he's got his hands down after the Jummah, I'm like, excuse me, are you Shia? Why are you praying like that? Just to start beef for no reason.
I've had some of my friends have had their hands folded in Salah whilst they're praying. Literally, someone will come over and fold their hands for them.
Exactly. No, there's actually a story Hamza Yusuf talks about. Abdullah ibn Zubair would actually break people's hands apart during the Salah.
Yeah, exactly. It's like,
that was
it's
back
funny
in the
because
time.
you hear the story. I think Sheikh Hamza mentions it as well. Famous story where one of the imams gave 2 salams and the Malikis behind him were like, "Where did you get this? Where did you get the second salam from?"
Yeah.
And he goes, "Oh, and he goes, do you know?" And the man said to him, "Do you know all the hadith?" He says, "No." "Do you know 3/4 of the hadith?" He says, "No." "Do you know half the hadith?" He goes, "Yes, I know half of all the hadith." He goes, "Well, put this in the other half that you don't know."
Mashallah. That's it though. 100%. And it's like, it's not so much the West African history has been swept under, but it's more like the Maliki tradition altogether just doesn't exist. And so that avenue to understanding, because the Hanafi madhab is strong. So like the ulama of Deoband, pretty much everyone has some acquaintance with Shah Wali Allah, and the giants over there. especially in the UK, because I'm pretty sure, like, I don't know, how big is the sort of West African, North African community in the UK? It's not that big, is it?
Nah, it's not that big. And the thing is, the ones that do come here a lot of time are usually like Salafi inclined anyway.
Yeah, that's
So
it.
yeah, so they don't really have like a madhab like that. It's just more like that Ikhwani Islam basically. Yeah.
Just to add, in regards to your community, like, and we were talking about Salafism before, where, I guess touching on that point, where I felt that in regards to Salafism, it does stifle culture, and I know that you've talked about on the Baraka Boys podcast, for example, and even like through your social media, even the way you discuss things as well, in general, where essentially what's happened is there's been an Arabification. I don't know how to say it.
Arabization
of Arabization of essentially the way we do culture, essentially, right? So for example, when someone becomes a practicing Muslim, suddenly they have the tupi and the thobe, and then I know Rafael is looking at me now because he likes wearing the thobe, but in general,
I feel like it just covers up how fat I am, like it works for me in that sense.
But essentially, like, people think it's like some sort of uniform, right? And I guess, like, for example, right, like, I've got friends that are like students of knowledge, and then, for example, some of them may be Bengali, and I'm like, I tell them, like, look, mashallah, you're following the sunnah in the sense that you're covering and all that and wearing the thobe, and I understand that you see it as a sunnah. That's why you want to emulate the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? But in the same case, right, like, because in Bangla culture, we have a very similar kind of concept of the thobe, which is called the Punjabi, right? It's Rafael would have seen it because he's amongst the Bengali community, where it's literally like a thobe, but it's just colored and it's a bit more like it's got more patterns and stuff. So I'm like, bro, like, why are you like wearing the thobe when in your own culture you have like a vibrant version of that? Like, I don't understand, like, what do you, like, why not just wear, what your culture has been doing?
Look, for me, it's not so much of an issue as that, and I wonder if you agree with me, Momodou, but it's like, it's not so much the problem of wearing the thobe, it's more like thinking that you have to do that, or dress, or speak that way. Like, you have to do that to be following the sunnah.
The thing is, wear what you want. Like, we don't have a Sharia uniform. We have Sharia guidelines for clothing. So for the Malikis, it will be the awra mughallada, the major awra, or mukhaffafa, the minor awra, and that's what we have. And that's what we have, and that's what we've been instructed to cover. So, and obviously shouldn't be tying all these things, but just cover how you deem appropriate. If you want to wear a thobe, if you like wearing thobe, wear a thobe. But my issue is then when you kind of mandate it as a uniform, or when you feel like some people have the thing of maybe I'm more religious when I wear a thobe, or I'm more practicing where I wear a thobe, and that's the issue so it's not so much the clothing, it's the mentality behind the clothing.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to ask you quickly, because this is a funny one that actually causes some problems. The idea of the awra in the Maliki Madhab, and I actually thought it was quite brilliant. If you have a look at some of the hadith, the one hadith, for example, because for people who have no context, there's a slightly different opinion regarding awra in the Maliki Madhab. But maybe you can explain that a little bit, because I think it's really interesting, and it has, like, if you rock up in shorts somewhere, like that can get some.
Rafael's a dog as well, so he's wearing shorts and walking the dog.
We don't have to go full stereotypes here,
No, it's quite funny because in Egypt now, it's very common to see young men to come to the mosque in shorts, and no one says anything to them.
Mm-hmm.
So quite interesting. But in the Maliki school, so just going on your point, so we have two auras, the aura mughallada and the aura mukhaffafa. We have the aura mughallada, which should be covered basically always. It can only be shown to, like, if you're married, or like for a doctor, illa fi durura, which, it's only for absolute necessity, for example. And then you have the aura mukhaffafa, which is from the navel to the knee, belly button to your knee, including the knee. But then you have different opinion. Is it above the knee? Is it including the belly button? And they have a whole discussion on it. But what I find amazing in the Maliki school, people don't ask, I've been teaching this recently, is that they have a whole discussion on whether you have to cover the aura for Salah or not.
Mm-hmm.
They have a whole discussion, and they say the aura mughalada, if it becomes exposed in the Salah, your Salah is automatically batila. Yeah, it's automatically invalid. They say if the aura mukhaffafa becomes exposed in Salah, then therefore you have to, you're either fil waqt istihbaban, that you repeat the Salah, but within its time only. But then they say if you start the prayer with your aura mukhaffafa uncovered, you are athim, you are sinful, but your prayer is valid. And now when I teach that to people, that brings up a whole discussion. So therefore, if a woman prayed without hijab in the Maliki school, her prayer is still valid.
That's like, that reminds me, like, because I'm Hanafi, and the very, like, for example,
no way.
But essentially, they're relative. I don't know about Maliki Madhab. Like, you have to always cover your hair while you pray and stuff like that.
No, in the Maliki school, no.
Is it?
No,
Yeah, because it's a Hanafi madhab. So, and essentially, like, as well, and that you're sort of recommended as well to make sure you're wearing full sleeve shirt, so you're covering your, like, forearms and stuff. And I guess in this day and age, like, most people, like, I don't know. I think, like, what the kind of rationale is like when people try to say it's fine to sort of not wear long sleeve, is that, time and place and day, like, t-shirts are normal. Back then everyone would have worn essentially long sleeves, so that sort of cultural subtlety sort of plays out in the ruling, if that makes sense. So
100%.
I guess now, for example, when I was reading, like, I think Sheikh Faraz Rabbani put it on his website about the ruling on that, he wasn't strict on that specific. He was just like, look, if you feel like it's necessary, then, remind the person next to you who isn't wearing a full sleeve to wear it. Otherwise, like, it's not necessary per se. So what's your sort of take on that? Like, in the sense of cultural, when the rulings were sort of made, you're looking to the text of the past, and essentially they may also be influenced by the culture around them in order to make those rulings, if that makes sense.
100%. And the thing, don't get me wrong, I feel like, as you grow, you see more and more. For example, we have the qaida in usul, al-urf al-muhakkama, like the urf is a consideration when you deal with Sharia. And for example, a scholar of a place should not give a fatwa unless he knows the urf and ada, the culture and customs of that place. So ultimately, when I was younger, I was like, I don't give a crap. It's halal, it's permissible, I'm going to do it. I'm gonna go to the mosque and invest. I don't care who's gonna tell me anything, and I'm gonna debate you if you want to beef me on that, yeah. But obviously, naturally, you grow up and you get a bit of wisdom. You're like, you know what? There's no point of me causing so much, like, unrest in a mosque, for example, when it's easy for me just to cover up. It's not a big deal. It's not a big deal for me. And if we want to have a discussion later on, we can have a discussion later on about it. But I do feel like, obviously culture and custom is hugely important, and Islam does take that into consideration in a place. Don't get me wrong, I feel like the problem is, though, there is a fine balance that should be tread carefully, in a way, in the sense that you want, I mean, as a young people, want to change things. Obviously, you want to make Islam more culturally relevant, naturally. But at the same time, now we're going to debate whether we want fast change, or we want to do things like the shock factor, or you want to do things slowly, for example. And that's just a methodological difference. For example, for me, I think I'm a bit more of a maverick, in the sense that I do go for the shock factor. So for example, I will dye my hair, or I wear an earring, for example. I wear earrings, for example, because I don't believe these things to be haram. I know that a lot of people, I mean, my DMs get flooded daily. Astaghfirullah, akhi, why do you have your hair dyed? Or astaghfirullah, where did you get these things for earrings for? Tashabbub bin nisa, you are imitating women, and all this stuff. And obviously, I have sufficiently answered them. But again, I recognize that not everyone should do that. I feel like you just know the community that you're in. And again, fair enough, I'm not in a community. If I was an imam of a community, or an imam in a mosque, I might not be the way I would be. For example, maybe I would like push the water, or push the buttons a bit slower. But I'm not. I don't exist in the community. I'm not an imam. I'm not a teacher. I just have my online profile. So
that's interesting, because, like, I guess to have that sort of response, you just mentioned people messaging the DMs in regards to that. Like, I guess at the end of the day, like, we haven't really we've sort of taken the sort of very hardcore Salafi sort of way of doing things as a like absolute given, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then everyone, that's like your sort of standard, and now everyone judges off that standard.
I would say more that
the
masses of like the communities and the people, and I don't blame anyone, because it's just how it is. It's psychology, and it's something that happens in every space. But essentially, there's not a lot of understanding of ikhtilaf.
Yes.
And so, like, for example, if someone you gave the example of Salah, like if I was leading a masjid, I wouldn't know what to do, even when I'm leading a small congregation. And I wonder what your advice is on this, as a Maliki, and if there are other Maliki are listening. Yeah. What do you do when you're leading a congregation, for example, of Hanafi uncles? For example, my
you don't need
my in-laws are Hanafi, right?
Yes.
And you know, like if you pray different, Hamza Yusuf even mentioned this. He went to Afghanistan, or he was talking about Afghanistan, and he said like if you pray differently, they'll think you're a kafir.
Yep.
Like there's not extremists. They're not necessarily Salafis either, but it's just that like you don't. This is Islam. This is how it's done.
100%. If you ever find myself in Pakistan, I would never pray Sadal before they killed me as a Shia. Like I would never. I mean, the thing is, for example, it's a good question. When I was younger, again, I was a bit of a. My friend used to brand me as the Maliki extremist. So I would like lead a Salah. I would lead Jummah in school and just do one Salam and get up. And everyone's head is still turned to the right, waiting. Why? What? Like, why is the Imam got up for? You know, and I wouldn't even care. I'd be like, you know, I was a bit harsh. But now, depending if it's young people, generally I'll be like, listen guys, I'm Maliki Madhab, we just do one salam. Those who are not Maliki, you finish do your two salams. Because technically it's funny because again, it's just as you said, people don't know ikhtilaf and people don't even know fiqh. In the Hanafi Madhab, the salah is officially finished once you do tashahhud anyway. In the Hanafi school. So whether you do salam or not, even the salam is a part of the salah for them. But again, the salah is officially finished when you do salam, the tashahhud. In the Maliki school, once you do one salam, that's when you finish your salah. The second salam is either sunnah or recommended, depending on the opinion that you follow. So again, if I'm leading young people, I might just announce in the beginning, guys, I'm a Maliki. I'm going to do one salam, guys. Anyone who's not a Maliki, continue to do two. Or I would say, I'll just do two. If it's like an older congregation, as an example that you've given, I'll just do two salam. It doesn't take anything away from me. And again, it's just you knowing as well. It's just you knowing fiqh, and this is why the person who leads the prayer should know fiqh. For example, if I'm leading a group of Shafi'is, for example, when I do my Fatiha and do my surah, I will do my surah a bit longer to let them, because obviously Fatiha for them is a rukn, is a pillar of salah. They have to recite the Fatiha. So you want to give them enough time to finish the Fatiha if you're ever leading them. So you kind of all this ikhtilaf, you should if you're aware of it, it does help you kind of traverse and navigate it better with a bit more wisdom.
And that's why you need to study in these positions. And like it refers to what you were saying before too about how like you can't just like you could just pick up Mukhtasar Khalil and then just drop opinions from that all day. And like or Risala ibn Abi Zayd and just tell everyone, bash everyone over the head with the different opinions that are put there. But if you don't have that knowledge of ikhtilaf and even like a cursory understanding of other madahib, when you actually study a text with a teacher who'll actually break it down, all the different opinions, the dalil, everything, and then you kind of gain an appreciation for, like it completely changes the way you view and the way you practice. And it's much better because it's conducive to you being more understanding for others.
100%.
And it sort of, like it completely transforms your understanding, and the position that you occupy becomes so much more like you're not harming people's religion, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly. It's more wholesome, I think. But again, naturally, when you're younger, when you're younger, you have that bit much of a religious, bit of a religious zealot, isn't it? So you have that, you have that thing in your belly, and like, oh my god, let's do this, let's do that. But as you go a bit, get a bit of maturity, like it's not that deep, man.
No, of course, and it doesn't matter. Like, so what if I have to fold my hands? Like, I'm not going to burst into a ball of flames.
Exactly.
If I do, like it's good.
Salam.
It's not like,
exactly.
Yeah. But you're right, though. I think like there has to be a balance as well, and in the sense that if there is something within your madhab that's perfectly fine to do, like I like to use the example of fresh fades. Yes. Because in the Maliki madhab, there's a different opinion about qaza than in the Hanafi madhab. Hanafis are very strict about the haircuts.
Yeah, I take the Maliki opinion magically.
and it's not as strict in the Maliki madhab as it is in the Hanafi madhab.
Exactly.
So like, I would get a haircut that I thought looked good with a fade, like Tanzim does as well, obviously. And if someone confronted me about it, I would then be like, hey, no, like I can actually, this is a difference. So you do kind of, don't you think, have to have that balance where, you have to be accommodating and understanding in some contexts, but in other contexts, you can kind of stand up for the opinion that you follow.
100%. And I feel 100, I agree with you 100%, but I guess at the same time, it's one of those things where it's just knowing the position that you're in. So again, where you are, like if I was in a masjid, for example, I would probably go for the approach of progress learning, like slowly drop a few things here and have a discussion about it. Yeah. Oh, why is the qaza not seen as haram, or why is it seen as makruh, or what does qaza even mean us in the beginning, for example? Have a more of a nuanced approach. But again, I know myself, I'm a bit more I don't know. I think because of my experiences in the Muslim community, they haven't always been so great. I'm more like, I'm gonna live my life. As long as I believe as long as I can sufficiently back up what I'm doing, and I believe it to be true, that's what I'm gonna do. And if you like it, you like it. If you don't like it, kick rocks.
I also wanted to ask, like, there's the other side of things where people will be like, look, you're practicing like conveniently a more chill version of Islam. You may get this in the DMs a lot, where you're just doing things, the rules you're following and the rulings you're sort of applying is that essentially it's just easy for the nafs. So really, because there's people who be like, at the end of the day, it's maqasid of the Sharia, for example, or all that, the higher aim of the Sharia. People will be like, no, you just sort of looking for the rulings in order to facilitate the nafs. You get what I mean? So what would your sort of response to that be?
Like talfiq, basically.
Yeah, talfiq. Yeah, but even more than talfiq, they say ittiba al-hawa. You're following your desires, And the funny thing is, my response to that, personally, again, I think the dichotomy is completely false. I don't believe someone who wants to follow the desires would even look for a religious opinion. Personally, because all these things are religious opinions still, and they're not even like fringe opinions. One thing is let's say the concept of shadh, completely aberrant views, like only one imam said it, and it's not even sure if he said it, cool. We can and let's say you become someone that only ever follows those opinions, then you can be asked, okay, what are you doing here, But let's say you have an imam who is a bona fide imam and several imams said had held a difference of opinion. I don't see that's how that's following your desires. Just you choosing a different approach to things. Personally.
Like I guess essentially it's more like there are the options on the table in regards to the rulings, and you're just taking one that's essentially a valid opinion at the end of the day. So would you say that's the case with that?
Yeah, 100%. That's what I tend to do anyway. And the thing is, but I feel like I don't know why Muslims can't live and let live. I just don't understand it. If you see someone that again, social media, I'm on social media. I see everyday things I disagree with, I don't like. I just keep it scrolling, or I follow people. Like, it's not that deep to me. If you see someone do something that you don't like, and it bothers your soul that much, like for example, I get several questions. Let's say the age-old debate about music. That comes in my DMs like every other day, or oh, you put music on, and okay. I feel like music will take me away from Allah or distract me from reading Quran. Then I always say simply don't listen to it then. Like, there is something in the Sharia, I think it's Shatibi who mentions it. People become Qarafi. People become faqih nafs. Faqih nafs is that, you are the scholar of your own soul. So like, if you feel like something is detrimental to you, then don't do it. And if you feel like you can't engage in this activity because for whatever reason it may be, or you don't even feel convinced by the opinion, then don't do it. I don't see why it's so difficult for some people.
What is like a little bit of a breakdown for people who may not know on the fiqh of listening to music? I mean, a breakdown is kind of putting you on the spot in the sense that like it's not something you can concisely explain. Like certain masail need hours and hours and hours of plowing.
you want me to do a breakdown of a topic that's been debated for 1400 years and still hasn't been solved.
Yeah, that's it. Just start at the beginning, start with like the salaf, and then go through each imam's opinion one by one. That's it, and then that'll fill up the rest of the podcast. Yeah, exactly. No, just like there is ikhtilaf there. And yeah, so just briefly,
I think ultimately it comes from the verse, lahu, what is the meaning of lahu in the Quran, and then obviously we have the famous commentary of Ibn Abbas, and he says it's ghina, music, but that's just, and again there's even debates on whether Ibn Abbas even said that, is it sahih from him. What we do have, we don't have anything clear cut from the Quran and Sunnah explicitly that says music's haram, and this is the point I always say to people: if it was explicitly haram, then we wouldn't have ikhtilaf on it. For example, no one's debating, for example, is pork haram because it's explicit. No one is debating is khamar haram because it's explicit. Music is not explicit; it's interpretation of it. Yeah. Then we have obviously again we have Qadi Bakr ibn Arabi, who's the great Maliki muhaddith and faqih, who said that there's nothing lam yasih أي حديث إلى النبي عن الغناء. There's nothing authentic that goes to the Prophet في تحريم الغناء, on the prohibition of music. For example, and you have many scholars who said this. Ghazali says the same thing. Ghazali's famous statement: those who say music is haram haven't heard the birds
songs
sing.
Of birds.
Yeah, I haven't heard the birds sing. And these kind of discussions have been existing for ages. And there's so many things on music. I mean, I've got articles on it that I can kind of send to the listeners if they wanted to kind of go into further discussion on it. Ultimately, it's difference of opinion. Ultimately, I do recognize the majority of scholars have said it's impermissible, but what's quite funny. The famous this kind of dichotomy between Ahlul Medina and Ahlul Kufa. The famous discussion, they say two things. Don't ever ask Ahlul Kufa about khamar, about nabith, which was a drink made from fermented dates that had the ability to intoxicate people, because they were known to drink that. And then they say in the same breath, do not ask Ahlul Medina about music, because they were known to be like, they liked music. Imam Malik himself wanted to be a musician when he was a kid. He wanted to be a musician when he was a kid, and you have like famous imams from the Maliki tradition that were also like musicians. They would play like music in their classes, like play instruments in their classes before they teach a dars.
Yes, subhanAllah.
That's something that not many people would be aware
and
of.
Even just like around the topic of music, like I know we're talking more about, I guess, how the sound and listening to it and if it's permissible or not, but to go even deeper, it's like one thing that people sort of don't realize when they sort of sideline music as being straight up haram is that actually in music itself, it's like a science in of itself, and if you go deeper, it's almost like mathematics, or it can get into mathematics in the sense of the rhythms and the beats and all that sort of stuff. So it's a science in of itself that you have to understand. There's a bit more nuance to it as well, that you're sort of erasing. And like, for example, the quadrivium and the trivium, like those are like knowledge that you sort of seek, and music's incorporated into that. So people don't realize that nuance as well. And
Islam
and
also spread through music. To put it bluntly, if you look at the spread of Islam in Indonesia, and as we know, Tim Winter, Abdul Hakim Murad did a talk about this as well, about the Javanese, the Javanese music that was incorporated, and also massive in the subcontinental tradition as well, like the songs about the awliya,
Awali, and
that's it. Yeah,
but
that's a massive part of it.
What's quite funny though? This is very interesting for me. I've never ever heard a traditionally trained West African scholar say that music is haram. And I do think it's very cultural, because let's be honest, black people, we love singing and dancing, like we love singing and dancing. This is a part of our tradition. I remember one of my teachers, he said, don't bring me copy and pasted fatwas saying music is haram from the rhythmless hemisphere.
Well, that's fantastic. I love that. But no, it's interesting, because like from what I've read and from what I've heard, that like saying music is haram is a strange statement. I don't think anyone actually could say music is haram in the sense that, but like I know that the daf, for example, is permissible pretty much by consensus, and singing pretty much by consensus again. There were times even when in the presence of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, people would actually sing about it, like Tala al-Badru alayna. And there's even a hadith that a Shafi'i teacher told me. They report it because a lot of the Shafi'is in the Shadhili Tariqah narrate through them a hadith about the Abyssinians who the Prophet ﷺ inquired. Have you heard of this hadith before? There's a hadith that was reported to me by an Indonesian Shafi'i sheikh who mentioned that the Abyssinians were dancing and singing the praises of the Prophet.
Abdul Saleh. Abdul Saleh, in the mosque. And also, people miss something in that hadith. Yes, it's talking about they're beating the drums in the Masjid Nabawi, and again that shows the kind of duff being and the kind of dancing being permissible. But what people miss from that hadith is the hadith is in the presence of Rasulullah, but who's watching? Aisha, Sayyidah Aisha radhiyallahu anha is watching. And what people miss from that hadith, and what scholars have extrapolated from that, is that it's permissible for men to dance in front of women.
Well, see, these are the nuances that I guess people aren't aware. But like, people will go to that hadith, the famous one where it's like, I I think it was like towards the end of Day of Judgment, things such as, was it music will be permissible, and there's like a category. You're probably
No, but
familiar with.
they don't even
You
say
know what I
music.
mean?
Hadith. That's the funny thing. The Hadith doesn't say music. The Hadith says entertainment. A time will come where people will make, prostitution and make and they'll make I believe it's lahu again, entertainment permissible in the
Yeah,
end
it's
of
low.
time. And what you always people translate it as music, but Hadith doesn't say that. So entertainment could be several things. Entertainment. Why, I don't know why have they said entertainment is music? It could be strip clubs, for example.
Yeah.
Yeah, which would be relevant, wouldn't it?
Exactly.
Essentially, yeah.
Subhanallah. Just to also, I know like we've talked a lot about, the ilmi side of things in Islam. I also want to touch on more about, you've got the sort of activism side to things of how you do things. And I really wanted to delve deep into this because, that, we sort of are aware of each other through Twitter, for example. That's how we initially connected. So I know that, mashallah, as you mentioned through the podcast, like Malcolm Effect and even, your tweets, it's very much on the activism route. More so than actual ilmi there's like those kind of Twitter accounts where they're more on the ilmi side. They only post hadith and that, which is great, mashallah, but at the same time it's like that's all it is. But for yourself, like you also go more down the activism sort of route. So maybe could you explain like sort of a brief background in terms of what got you into sort of activism and what you sort of do in that front?
Just touching on that point, I feel like it's the ilmi stuff, there's several people doing that anyway. And I feel like, as a Muslim, I feel like you have to contribute to the current affairs. And I feel like if your Islam doesn't compel you to contribute to the current affairs, then I feel like you're not really utilizing your ability in that way. Because, the ilmi stuff is always going to be there. Teaching someone how to do fara'id of wudu, you can do that. You can teach all these things. But again, how are you engaging in the world around you? And I feel like a lot of the time, this is the problem I find with a lot of students of knowledge, who I study with personally, who I know, who I'm in contact with. I find that it can become, how in academia, you can say that these academics live in ivory towers. I find a lot of the time students of knowledge live in ivory towers as well. In the sense that they're just so concerned in the inner workings of fiqh and this and the kind of minute details of masail, which is great, but again, it's a very niche thing. It doesn't affect change around you. So I thought, I don't want to fall into that trap personally. So I thought, how can I affect change in the world around me? Naturally, I'm a black man. I'm someone who's experienced racism several times, and something, I'm very inspired by Malcolm X. So it's very something dear to myself. So I kind of, I mentioned the podcast. I initially got inspired by Barack Obama in the 2007-2008 election. Obviously, lo and behold, I strongly dislike him now. But naturally, me naive, I was like, okay, yeah, this is like the first black president. I remember saying I'm going to be the first black prime minister. I kind of, with my background, with my friends who are involved in like gang crime and, a couple of my friends being killed, or a friend of mine was stabbed to death at a young age. So I kind of thought, okay, how can I, kind of help the situation? So I stood for election when I was 15 or 16. It was like a youth parliament thing. And I won the election, alhamdulillah. And I stood on the mandate of tackling knife crime in the UK. Then from there, it's just been an onward journey from there, just where I can, protesting, giving speeches, teaching people, delivering conferences, delivering diversity training at different organizations. It's just been ongoing since then, really.
SubhanAllah, like just because this is a really fascinating topic in regards to students of knowledge and them seeking ilm, and at the same time, engaging with the society around them, where man, like me and Rafael talk about this like all the time, where essentially we find that a lot of people around us, not a lot actually, more, as you said, like more of a select crew where, mashallah, they're so knowledgeable in the, studying hadith sciences, all that sort of stuff, but at the same time it's like they're in such a bubble where they're trying to they act like the world is in a way where everyone should be wearing burqas and go around society. I'm like, look, that's not the society, that's not going to happen anytime soon. It's such like a gap of thinking, and I'm sometimes like, wait, so what's their knowledge like? Mashallah, they're probably getting closer to Allah, understanding the nuances of the deen, all that sort of, which is very important. But at the same time, it's like, isn't the end of the day our religion meant to be about applying it to today's day and age? But the question I wanted to ask is like, did you feel that because maybe people will be like, look, the sort of education system when it comes to seeking knowledge is slanted in a way because, I don't know, post-colonization essentially has stifled the sort of thinking that allows one to sort of use their knowledge and apply it in
100%.
today's day and age, or something people attribute it to something? But have you felt that, is it more of the sort of systems or institutions that are in place that may not facilitate the sort of activism, or do you feel that Islam in its nature should facilitate activism, or did your sort of activism form your Islam, which then further formed your activism? Does that make sense? So it's a bit of everything, but yeah.
I totally think I think it's like a second option you get. I think totally my Islam was what. I think it's like an interplay of both. Naturally, my activism was me being interested in black issues. That led me to, discovering Malcolm X. And obviously, he also helped me kind of come back to Islam in the way that I did as well. And also on the flip side, my Islam and me reading about the Prophet ﷺ and how Allah himself is adil and establishing justice, and Allah, hates oppression, all these things. For me, I don't see how one cannot be involved in social issues as a Muslim. I truly don't understand that. I feel like the point of a Muslim in this earth is literally to, Allah wants to see justice established on this earth. So much so that, they say shirk is dhulm. And that's the biggest sin is a form of oppression. And the opposite of dhulm is adl, being just. And I feel like, it's almost of, if you, follow that to its logical conclusion, you would say that faith is justice. If shirk is dhulm, then faith is justice. So for me, again, my faith has to be based on a sense of justice and a sense of establishing justice. So that definitely has fueled my kind of activism, my approach to, being in these causes, which again, it does throw up a lot of issues. But again, for me, I'm not going to diss anybody, but I find that the disconnect from a lot of people studying Islam is quite sad, to be fair. It's quite saddening. Because again, if you can speak to me on the mas'ala of wiping your socks, for example, on hours on end, or you can speak to me on this rawi, is this rawi thiqah, is he trustworthy, is this rawi rejected, is this hadith rejected, is this sanad mutassil or it's not, or if you can speak on connected or not, if you can speak on all these issues, but you have nothing to say on racial inequality or institutionalized racism, I don't think you have. I think you kind of got your lens a bit foggy, personally. Or you can't speak to me about capitalism, or you can't speak to me about, on how policing works in the West and all these things, but you can speak to me on hours on certain masail. I feel like, again, those things are nice. Those things are a niche market. You'll find your crowd in a masjid. You'll find a personal thing. I think that for me personally, what I've done now recently, I've switched. So the reason why you made a good point that I don't just post about Islamic stuff and ilmi stuff. If I'm honest with you, the ilmi stuff is literally a personal thing for me. It's just that I enjoy it. I love fiqh. I love the sciences of deen. Therefore, I study it. It's a personal thing to me. But I know for affecting change, it's not going to be that route. It's going to be understanding the arguments, understanding the theories that exist out there, and engaging with that.
Exactly, man. Like, just to give an example, like when you're reading the Quran, or the stories of previous scholars and any of that, like for example, Fir'aun had to stand. Musa alayhi salam had to stand up to Fir'aun. Like that's like activism, like straight up, right? It's 100%. Not like the Quran is fixating necessarily on as if your wudu is valid, if you wipe over the like all those kind of conversations are obviously it's very important in the sense of dictating how we live. By in the sense of rulings, by in the sense of looking through Islam only through legalese way of things is very, very problematic, because you're kind of missing the point at the end of the day.
Even
right?
the seerah, like, how can you not say that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was an activist? Like, how could you say that he didn't? Like, he didn't just leave and take his followers out to Medina and that was it. Like, he actively pushed for social change. Like, he could have led his followers into a camp in the desert and said that, let's just leave this society the way it is. No, he actively wanted to change and transform the society. And he's, as far as I'm concerned, and this is something I learned when I discovered Islam, as far as I'm concerned, the only founder or canonical figure in a major religious tradition that was so explicitly anti-racist and made explicitly anti-racist statements. The only one. I can't see in any other tradition the same.
Yeah.
SubhanAllah.
100%.
That's so true.
100%.
And just to add to that as well, where essentially like I had this conversation with a few students of knowledge, mashallah, very knowledgeable, and some of them haven't even read Malcolm X's biography. I'm like,
I was going to ask you actually, how important would you say Malcolm X's story and life is for obviously the African and African American community and diaspora, but also just Muslims in general, like.
It's one of those ones where it's such a double. It's one of those ones where it's sad that you see his legacy has been appropriated by so many Muslims who are non-black Muslims, but at the same time the racism still exists in their communities. So
Yeah.
they'll or what you do, they'll tout Malcolm X as this, yeah, but in the nation he was, obviously again naturally he did leave the whole separatist ideology. Naturally he said that, I don't believe in that, but to kind of dampen him, and you find that people say he was, he was almost of this kumbaya Muslim and doesn't matter anymore. But no, he was still a black nationalist. No matter what, till his death, he was a black nationalist. There's no way of moving away from that. And it's funny because the same people who probably say, who would say, for example, that, oh, you can't speak on these issues, you're not a scholar. They would have said the same thing to Malcolm X if he was alive, because he wasn't a scholar, traditionally, classically trained anyway. But he had, his influence was greater than most scholars that we've seen in the last couple hundred years. But in terms of his legacy and importance, because speaking on like education, I feel like it comes down to syllabus. For example, if I ever set up an institute, I would make, as well as like reading, the syllabus of the Maliki school, Ashmawiya, Akhdari, Ibn Ashir, the Risala, and then you have Mukhsa Khalil or Akhdar Masali, any of these books. I would equally have a syllabus where it's mandatory reading to read the autobiography of Malcolm X. I feel like I feel like Islamic institutes, especially in the West, need to incorporate these things. Because he was somebody who was a devout Muslim. He was one of the first, actually the first African American, one of the first African Americans to receive an ijazah from Azhar for dawah.
No.
So Al-Azhar gave him an ijazah because he stayed in Cairo for about 3 months, in Egypt, Cairo and Alexandria for about 3-4 months, where he learned his prayers, learned a bit of like the basic sciences of Islam, and he actually got, like, his faith was tested in front of the Azhar board. About his faith, and his creed was tested, and then after that they granted him an ijazah. And this, by the way, this can be found in Manin Marabou's Malcolm X's Life of Reinvention. Everyone knows the autobiography of Malcolm X, but no one knows this one as well. This one gives probably much more detail than the actual autobiography, by the way. It's called Life of Reinvention, and he speaks of it there. He speaks of the Malcolm X was one of the first African Americans to receive an ijazah from Azhar to give dawah, and he also was granted several scholarships to send African Americans to Azhar free of charge, and they'll cover everything because they come under Malcolm X's movement. People don't realize this,
Well, and that's exactly the point, and it ties back to, I guess, now and day and age where we have students of knowledge, they aren't actually aware and don't actually understand. Like, as you mentioned earlier, like, you have to understand, how capitalism works. Like, how can you not understand the oppression that exists? Why? Like, it's so misdirected in essence, and that's the sort of disconnect we see. Me and Rafael have seen a lot, and then what happens is when we bring these issues to light in front of for example, students of knowledge, like, who are up there within the community, they sort of like, I'm not like knowledgeable, or I'm not a student of knowledge by any means, so then I sort of seem like I am sort of at times reinterpreting this the tradition, or being influenced by sort of Western institutions, etc., etc. So what's your sort of take on that? Is that sort of sentiment?
Do you find people trying to undermine your religious like legitimacy when 100%. You make genuine claims about racism?
100%. You get it from the West being like, oh, just shut up about talking about race. You get those people, or you get those, focus more on your religious spirituality, and therefore racism will be solved. And you get all these, you get all these things that people will say this stuff to you, because again, either to kind of silence you or undermine your religious literacy. People even asked me before, are you a Muslim who's a race activist? Or are you a race activist who's a Muslim? I'm like, huh? What is that? What is that? Like, I don't get. I'm like, huh? Like, I don't understand. I don't understand. Why is that? Why is that even a distinction anyway? What does that even mean? Do you know what I mean? I'm someone who's a Muslim, and my faith has compelled me to speak about justice. Naturally, again, you can't. For me, all these things are intertwined. You can't separate white supremacy from capitalism, from race inequality. These are all things that are linked for me. And understanding these things is how only way I see things progressing or moving forward. I mean, and again, I don't know whether you touched on this before in the past, but you have these things of where I'm not going to name any names, but you have, particularly in America, you have a body of scholars who claim traditionalism, who claim to be traditional, and they will be against a lot of these movements, for example. So they'll be against movements like BLM. They'll be against movements like, other liberal movements because they say, oh, you lot are all cultural Marxists or whatever it may be. Again, what does that speak to me? They just, again, it's like now you have someone who graduated from madrasa, who has not done any of the work to understand what Marxism is or understand what capitalism is, or who understands what radical feminism is. For example, I know we're studying right now critical race theory stuff. Same thing here. You have scholars who come out and say critical race theory is haram. And you're like, huh?
Yeah.
Okay. Again, that just proves again you haven't studied the topic at all. You haven't engaged in it, but because you have a religious background, somehow you are now a scholar in these theories, in these philosophies, which again, it doesn't always transfer over. And majority of the time, it doesn't transfer over. You can be and the thing, young Muslims get confused. Someone can be a great scholar in Islam. It doesn't mean they're a scholar on these theories, and it doesn't mean they know anything about these theories in a substantive way.
Yeah, like it's essentially like just touching on that, like it's about essentially knowing where to stay in your lane. Like I feel like once there's people who are mashallah studying of knowledge, they sort of try to pass judgments in other fields, in fields that they don't even have an authority in at all, but then they sort of find that I've actually studied the tradition, so I have this say, if that makes sense. So
Exactly.
do you find that prominent sort of thing in general, because it kind of touches on race issues where, for example, like I guess the whole situation with George Floyd, like because of that situation, obviously naturally what happens in masjids is that they start talking about race, and then I'm like, okay, cool, like I'm gonna go to one talk, and I went to one, and then subhanAllah, like to be fair, I love the sheikh for the sake of Allah, but at the same time, the way it was the topic was delivered was pretty much the fruits of it was racism, where he's just giving the example of Bilal radiallahu anhu and how we should be racist because he's black. I'm like, is this still where the conversation's at? Like, I don't understand. Like, you get what I mean?
So, but that snapshot there is probably majority of the masjids in the Western world. Literally, you find like the discourse hasn't gone beyond, but Bilal was black. I'm thinking, are we really still here? The tokenization of Bilal is still like we should be talking about. Okay, cool. Why is it still a problem? Why is it still a problem? Again, for me, it depends on what you see an imam as. I don't see as an imam just someone who leads the salah. I think an imam, it should be a community leader, and as a community leader for me is activism. You should be, you should be on the front line. You should be pushing, promoting these things. Again, we can have a discussion about BLM and what's the approach to associate with movements who you believe that are contrary to your faith. What is, and again, and can we separate the movement from the slogan? All these things again, I would appreciate a discussion on that, but kind of just saying blanket haram to engage in BLM is when I find it problematic, because you're now, putting people to a side and telling people that you are now going to be punishable, but it's punishable by God to engage in a movement that is talking about racial inequality, and I find that very deeply problematic.
And it's almost, by extension, there are certain people who will conflate any kind of racial activism then with kufr.
Exactly.
Like it becomes a religious thing. Whereas, and I think there's a twofold issue. I wanted to ask you, do you feel like there is a lot of racism within the Muslim community, and that's kind of why there's such a sort of shallow discussion from a lot of parts? So like, for example, within the Arab community towards like my wife's community, the Bengali community, I noticed that there's some kind of there's a greater pattern of racism there than there is the other way, for example. There's a power 100%. Dynamic, and then the other thing, the other thing is as well, it's like, what is the West African, like you may have your finger on the pulse there, the West African community's response to BLM, George Floyd, and what's happening in America? Are they sort of engaged with this thing? Are they interested, or is it something that is like the ulama in particular? I mean, are they sort of more pragmatic and engaged with these matters than the ulama in the West and beyond are?
I mean, I feel like a lot of time in West Africa, they do exist in a bubble, because when I sit with West Africans, you have to understand it's like the famous saying that there's no black people in West Africa, and what I mean by that is black. The term black, obviously, racist is a social construct. So the term black only becomes a thing when it encounters the other. So, for example, I'm only black because there's something called white. So in the West, I'm black. In Gambia and Senegal, I'm not black. Our demarcating factor is not something as black. It's this person's from the Wolof tribe or Mandinka tribe, whatever tribe it may be. So for them, when I speak to like young black people born and raised in Senegal, when I encounter them in Egypt and explain the issues to them, they're not even aware of it. Like for them, racism doesn't, not the same way, not at all. And obviously now, so social media, they're a bit more aware of it. But even like students of knowledge who are like amazing in what they do, they're like, wow, I didn't even know it was that bad. And what they do know though is what they do know for them, they just think Arabs are racist because they've experienced so much racism by Arabs in Egypt. I mean, I've explored. If I tell you, like my own teachers have said some of the most racist stuff, like anti-black stuff I've heard in my life. Like I'll just give you an example. I was sitting in an Azhar class, which was a class in Maliki Fiqh. So obviously in Azhar, from the school system up until university, and they separate you by Madhab. So the Malikis have one class and the Shafis, whatever it may be. So when you're a Maliki, naturally you can imagine that class is full of black people. Like, everyone's black in that class. Everyone's from West Africa. They're from Nigeria, from Senegal, from Gambia, whatever it may be, Mali, and so forth. So we were in that class and the teacher said, Ya shabab, la tatazawwaju min Afrika. Do not get married from Africa. I was like, huh? Okay.
Oh, wow.
He said, because if you marry an African lady, this is the most offensive, I'm not going to swear, the most offensive stuff I've heard in my life, yeah? He said, because when you get married from Africa and your African lady, her hair is so coarse and harsh, if she sleeps on your chest, her chest will cut you at nighttime. And this is a class, this is a class in front of 30, 40 black kids. And some people might say something. We didn't say it. I was so in shock. I was like, huh? And she goes, afdal lakum, it's better for you to get married from Turkey because the hair is beautiful and nice.
Oh my goodness.
Do you see? And this is Azhar.
That's jaw dropping.
This is in Azhar,
Oh, wow.
I've heard, and or in a similar class as well, different teacher said, ha'ula fi afariqa ya'kuluna qirda. Those in people in Africa that eat monkeys. Or you hear things like, I remember another teacher said to me, for example, something like the anti-blackness is so it permeates so much that I don't even think they're intentional in what they're saying. They don't even know they don't even know why it's offensive. One teacher said to me, we're doing chapter of Tayammum one day. Basic chapter, Fara'id of Tayammum. What's the Fara'id? It's the niyyah, the intention, the wiping of the face, the wiping of the hands up into the wrist, whatever. Then the teacher carried on and said, one day you lot might find yourself in Africa where they've got no water. You see what I mean?
Wow.
So I'm just like, that's how bad it is. So naturally, when the black kids experience that, they just think, okay, the Arabs definitely racist. They have so much anti-blackness in them. And this is what you go through. And I feel like just not to kind of, you don't like, I'm not someone who is like, oh, complain, just detailing the experiences that you go through. Like, for example, me, when I started practicing Islam, you go to the masjid and you experience racism in the UK. Then you say if I was detailing the journey for you, you'd be like, okay, fair enough. Then they're not following the practice. They're not practicing Islam properly. That's what you think to yourself this is the mindset when I was younger. Okay, they're racist, but clearly they haven't got Islam properly. Then you think to yourself, okay, and maybe they're in the West. Then you try and say, it's because they've been affected by Western values. Then you go to Egypt, a Muslim majority country, and say to yourself, oh, okay, this is a Muslim majority country now. They must know Islam better. Then you experience the same racism, and you're like, whoa, okay. Then you start having doubts in your faith now. Is Islam a racist religion now? Because you're like, why are people who have been majority Muslim for millennia still having racist views? Then you think, no, you know what? They still don't practice the faith properly. Then you open up the fiqh books. And I said this before, which got me in a lot of trouble, actually. And this is me, my controversial part. I don't care. A lot of students of knowledge who are not my friends, they always snitch to my teachers what I post on social media. So I put on social media one day. I genuinely was shocked. I read in a commentary, and it's also in the Waghalisiya by Ahmad Zarruq, but it's also a commentary on Akhdari. The Sheikh said, this is a classical fiqh book written, how many hundred years ago. It said that a black woman, by the way, specifically Sauda, a black woman does not need to wear hijab because she's ugly. It also says in fiqh books which I've read, it says that the dowry, a black woman, is dowry is less, and it also says that she's not even required to have a wali because she's undesirable in the first place. Goodness.
So with those adjectives, like with those specific adjectives, it's described in the fiqh books. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's the same. In Risala ibn Abi Zayd, one of the commentaries I was reading on that, it talks specifically about not going and or engaging in certain things in Sudan,
Yes.
the land of the
And then you read Ibn Khaldun, who said that black people are likened to animals. And so can you imagine again, it's like, can you just imagine, like, just put yourself in a position like you're a black person and you want to study your faith and this is what you come across. And then all of that you think, and then all of that, because wallahi, yeah, I still tried to make excuses. I'm like, you know what? They were affected by the time, Ghafarallah anhum, like may Allah forgive all of them. Ultimately, they were affected by their time. And again, it doesn't mean it's right, but again, they're affected by their time. I'm not someone who's a moral presentist, for example. I don't project my understanding of morality onto the past. I'm like, cool. But then you think now in 2020, now with everything that's going on, and you still experience it, and you still and not just experience it. You have literally scholars who are not black having a backlash against like your critical race theory being haram. You hear all these things, like, wow, like you really haven't moved on, you really haven't changed. So like it just causes you to think that you don't just hate black people. That's what you think.
No, of course.
Like what? I don't know. Like, what else can you conclude? I guess in that sort of situation, right?
You
like
need activism,
explicitly or implicitly. Like that's the conclusion for any sort of like someone like yourself as well, who's going to the tradition. But sometimes wouldn't you say though, like how would you sort of advise someone in similar background as yourself, who is taking a similar path as yourself, who essentially, because the sort of like, if you like, for myself, like for example, the way online dawah is done, where they sort of hint at, okay, look at the tradition, study the tradition, which is very important. It's like that's where all the answers are, right? In the sense that our tradition of the past, everything that our scholars said were pretty much infallible by nature. How they sort of talk about the previous scholars, you know what I mean? And then essentially what you just described, you actually hit the books, and then you start finding stuff like that, and then people get confused, like, wait, is this what Islam essentially produces? Like, what's this? What sort of happened? Like, what happens in that situation? So, like, how do you sort of, I guess, demarcate, Islam for being Islam, or sort of versus sort of scholars who are misinterpreting?
Oh yeah, they have their own biases. Yeah. How do you deal with that?
Like, how do you make that demarcation? Like, if that makes sense.
I mean, it's a good question, because the problem is, even though we as an aqidah point, we don't ascribe infallibility except to the messenger. The problem is people do deify the scholars.
Yeah, like implicitly, they do.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, the thing is, like, I like you would think, let's say you guys, for example, you would think me pointing it out that the scholars said these racist things should be uncontroversial, in the sense that it's a controversial statement, but it shouldn't be a controversy that I made this statement. But literally, because people have deified these scholars, it's become a thing of like, how dare you diss this scholar? I'm thinking, huh? Like, why is that? Why am I getting attacked now? How can I be the one getting attacked? Literally, I'm so confused. How am I getting attacked for bringing this out? But in terms of what you said in your question of how do I make demarcation, literally all I do is I go back to what Imam Malik said, in the sense that he said that every person's statement can be accepted or rejected, and the only person who we accept blindly or accept fully, wholeheartedly, is the messenger of Allah. And that's my thing. Alhamdulillah, and I know for a fact we'll never find it. There's no such thing as you said before. The messenger of Allah was an anti-racism activist. So ultimately, you're never going to find any racism from Allah and His messenger. Yep. Alhamdulillah. As long as I know that with yaqeen, and I do have yaqeen in that, certainty in that, I'm good. So when I see scholars, I'm like, okay, he was a man, he was infallible, he made a mistake. May Allah forgive him. And we keep it moving.
Yeah. And essentially, I've had this sort of told to me as well, and I'm sure you've had this sort of approach where you'll have students of knowledge with you who are sort of like, when they come across those sort of books in the past and see those sort of racist statements, what they try to do is reinterpret aspects of what that scholar said, or that specific statement, makes sort of excuses for them, and they'll sort of draw to the sort of fact that in the deen you're meant to make excuses for everyone, that sort of stuff. What's your sort of take on that sort of approach in general?
Nah, I just feel like you're just being intellectually dishonest here. Literally, I've seen that a lot. I've experienced that. They're like, oh, maybe he meant it like this. I mean, the other day we were talking about actually music again in an online discussion group with different students of knowledge, and they were saying that maybe the Prophet ﷺ, so he mentioned, one scholar said that the Prophet ﷺ might have allowed Muslims might have allowed music for non-Muslims, but not allowed it for Arabs. And I said, huh? I said, huh? What do you mean? He goes, yeah, I've heard one scholar said this. And I said, okay, are you saying that the Prophet ﷺ legislated divine law based on race? Is that what you're saying? He said, I'm not saying that, but even if he did, so what? If the Prophet said it was the Prophet. I'm thinking like, okay, that's not an answer, first and foremost. And second of all, do you not know the repercussions of what you're saying? Are you saying the Prophet allowed, like he basically split up his people, that people, things that were good for his own people, he made it haram for them, and people, things that were bad for his own people, made it haram, and things that were bad for others, he just made it permissible for them. I'm like, huh? That doesn't make, I can't accept that narrative that you're putting out there. Do you know what I mean? And but again, for me, it just speaks to, once again, the lack of willingness for students of knowledge to engage critically.
Yeah, and just just to add as well, like in regards to knowledge, like in terms of like I enjoy studying, like for example, I'm reading the works of Edward Said, Orientalism, etc. Right? It's really sort of shaped how I view things, and it's really because what people will say is like, for example, people who are very much hardcore on the ilmi side is like, I'm studying Islam, this is the way. Why do you have to sort of use these sort of sciences in order to inform aspects of your deen, if that makes sense? And they sort of put you to the side. And what sort of happens in that, like, which is the problematic aspect of how they approach it, is that firstly, like, our scholars in the past were like polymaths, like they knew everything, essentially, like all fields. And then they're sort of demarcating Islamic knowledge to like one corner, whereas they're seeing batin knowledge as, over there. Like at the end of the day, like Islam is about, studying everything. Like for example, if you're a scientist, you essentially, you become as a Muslim, like you want to become a scientist and do your sciences essentially because it's driven by your Islam, right? And in the same sense, like that's why you study other fields of knowledge, like social sciences, as much as it gets like a bad rap amongst the scholars.
It's a civilization and a tradition of knowledge. In any, like, you have to know the dunya, you have to know your reality, and you have to see it. You have to see it through the lens of like the correct aqidah. But
exactly, but even more so. Okay, again, aqidah, basic aqidah, everyone should learn that. Yeah, even aqidah, we can debate aqidah back, all day long, which has been debated and still being debated. But ultimately, you don't exist in a vacuum. You exist in this world, and this world has competing theories that surround you, and you are affected by them, whether you like it or not. White supremacy affects everybody in the West. In the global world today, it still does. Whether you like it or not, whether you choose to acknowledge it, whether you choose to engage in it, whether you study it, it still affects you. So now, as a person who lives in this world, if you're sincere, if you really want to change the way the world is in terms of oppression, you have to engage in it. For me, I don't know. Sometimes I feel like people overcomplicate things, and I feel like sometimes, especially this is probably the curse of being a student of knowledge, and I found myself falling into this trap early on in my studies, is that you like to overcomplicate things and over analyze things in a way that it's not needed. Not saying that knowledge, obviously you should engage in knowledge in it to a depth, but in terms of like, okay, like for me, racism and fighting racism should not be a controversial topic. I don't know why it's controversial even. It should be as simple as saying, yes, we are against racism in all its forms of manifestation. Now, can we do something about it? But the thing in my issue is we're not even at the conversation of what we can do. We're still in the conversation of, is it even bad? Is it even as bad as people say it is? And that's what I find problematic.
Exactly. Like people don't realize, like for example, like if you study the tradition, like you'll suddenly like become a sort of embodiment of the tradition. That's not necessarily true, because at the end of the day, like when you exist in a certain society and that society does things in a certain way, be it like capitalism or white supremacy, etc., it's like you will be naturally shaped by those ideas, if that makes sense, that 100%. Already exist in society. Like for example, secularism as well. So it takes like other fields or knowledge, and you need to study those in order to undo like things like a sort of Eurocentric way of looking at the things like around the world. Like for example, as you alluded to earlier, like black only exists in relation to white, and that's how we've sort of demarcated, differentiated, with the people, right? Whereas as you mentioned, in Africa, it's not that they don't see things in that way, but we've just so embedded into the Eurocentric way of looking at things 100%. Where we can't move away from that. And so the problem is like people who are like deep into the ilmi side of things, they've already adopted those sort of givens in society, and they're sort of studying the deen, but then they don't realize that they're just supporting what they like. They're sort of propping up implicitly what they've adopted,
100%.
just being in the virtue of being in the society, but they don't undo those sort of ways of thinking, if that makes sense.
It's like it's 100%. It's like, people speak about like decolonial theory, and people don't realize how like we even have to decolonialize fiqh. Literally, because in the sense that you have so many fatwa that were like, again, you have fatwa that it was haram to wear English, so haram to learn English, it was haram to wear English clothes, it was haram for women to get educated, for example, it's haram for women, all these things. Again, when the ulama of Deoband were under the colonial rule or fighting against colonial, you understand their approach. You understand that mindset. You understand, the first in the maqasid is hifd al-deen, protecting your deen. I understand that totally. But again, our context has changed. So there's no point, you can't copy and paste those kind of rulings and say they still apply today. Or even, and again, not so much the rulings, and people won't say women getting educated is haram, but people had the similar mindset towards women, which has been imported from a colonial reaction to colonialism. And people don't even know where that mindset comes from. People think, oh, this is where the deen is. No, it's not. It's literally, you've imported a reaction to colonialism, and you've meshed it with Islamic rulings, and that's produced a mindset which you still have today. So as much as we can talk about decolonizing our curriculum in Western sciences, in Western theories and philosophies, we have to do the same to our Islamic stuff.
Yeah, of course. I wanted to ask you as well, because I think from I watched more recently, I read the autobiography of Malcolm X a while back.
Yeah.
And more recently I watched the film.
Oh, yeah.
With Denzel Washington, yeah. And I remember one scene, I think Malcolm X, you could probably elaborate a bit more, was quite impressed by the message of Islam and the fact that, during the Hajj, everyone would perform the Hajj together. Yeah. So it's a shame that, there's this racism that does exist, unfortunately, so prevalently, when it could potentially, like Islam could be a potential sort of mechanism for such profound transformation around the world
100%.
When it comes to not merely by just doing the Hajj together, because, the attitudes of racism were probably still prevalent during the time of Malcolm X, very prevalent. Though, how important would you say that aspect is in terms of even just da'wah and elevating humanity to a point?
I mean, that's such a heavy question in the sense that, first and foremost, people say that Islam solved the race question 1400 years ago. And people say that, but the fact of the matter is, well, if it did, then what happened to it, basically? Mm-hmm. How come it's still majority of Muslim countries are still heavily anti-black in most, in most majority of Muslim countries? Almost every language on this earth has a derogatory term for black people. In Arabic world they call it abid, and other societies as well, they use different derogatory terms. But in terms of what Malcolm X's Hajj, because funny, I watched it today, he says that, if he offers it as a potential solution. He goes that if Islam was practiced, or if Islam was given to the white man in America, so that could solve the race question. Again, it's in an ideal world, yes, but I don't know how true that would have been. I do recognize as well, people forget this point. People use that, Malcolm X's quote and saying this is why we should all become Muslim, because somehow that overnight racism will be cured. But again, Malcolm X in 1964 went on Hajj. He was a guest of the king. He performed Hajj as a VIP. So naturally, he wouldn't have saw like what everyone else experiences on Hajj, when the racism you experience on Hajj, and what other people might have, people who are black or people who are not Arab experience when they go on Hajj. So I don't know what experience would have been like. And ultimately, I remember one of my teachers said to me, he said maybe it was a hikmah of Allah, a wisdom from Allah, that when he took Malcolm when he did, because had Malcolm X stayed alive and saw the racism that exists in the Muslim world, what would have happened?
SubhanAllah. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, well, Muhammad Ali rahimahullah, talked about the experience that he had as well, like how he was a guest of various world leaders, Muslim world leaders, and how, they were of different backgrounds as well. He said, if I was just, no American would ever, like the white American family won't have me for dinner, but I can sit with world leaders as a Muslim. And so he sort of saw the emancipatory side of it there as well. Though I wonder how, he came to view that later, because it's certainly a very interesting and poignant point. I don't think anyone could say Islam solved the race issue. I think like it's the same as saying that Islam solved the issue of commercial like riba, where
Yeah,
Islam solved the issue of alcoholism. The alcoholism, riba, drug use, they all still exist in the Muslim community.
exactly.
Like, unfortunately, so it's like racism still exists, and it is something to do with jahiliyyah. I'm pretty sure Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam specifically said
Abu
to
Dhar.
one of the Sahaba, said you still have the traits of
Jahiliyyah in
jahiliyyah.
your heart. Yep.
Yeah, about racism. So
Yep.
I guess ignorance is everywhere.
Yep.
And that's not to sweep it under the rug, but it is just disconcerting. And I wonder how you would advise young Muslims, especially maybe those who are affected by racism, similar to what you've described and similar to what we're describing. How would you advise them to go about sort of transforming their environment and themselves?
It just depends where they are, man. It just depends where they are. It depends where they are in the UK or in America. In America, alhamdulillah, America's got a bit of a better diet because America has powerful black communities where they have, quote unquote, like black mosques, for example. Whereas the UK, we don't have the same thing. So in the UK, for example, you are, I do feel like probably in the UK, I don't promote this personally, 'cause I think things will get better. But I have heard in many black circles in the UK, black Muslim circles say, you know what, we're just going to make our own mosques now. And I think it's a shame because I'm not a separatist at all. Do you know what I mean? I feel like we should be coming together as Muslims. Do you know what I mean? But again, I totally understand the mindset where people are coming from in that they want to be separate because they're tired of it. There's only so much you can experience. Do you know what I mean? There's so much you can go to a madrasa and you're being told like, your natural hair is this, or you're looking like a kafir for your natural hairstyle, or all these things. So as a young Muslim, it depends. If you're talking from the England perspective, I would say, learn about your deen, obviously. Know that the Allah's messenger are far the furthest removed from racism and racist ideology. What you see out there and what you see Muslims who seem to be racist, they do not represent this deen at all, and the race rhetoric. And I'll just say, just kind of keep it moving from that point. And if you experience racism, to use it as a point as education, and again, learn about the legacy of black people within Islam. Learn about the legacy. So, for example, starting from the prophets, Musa alayhi salam was black. He was described as to be a black person, as when the Prophet went on Isra and Miraj, he said about Musa, Ra'aytu rajulan adam al-shadid. I saw a man who was very dark skinned, speaking about Musa. And this is Muslim of Imam Ahmed, when he speaks about the word Adam, Adam, it means black. The word Adam means black in Arabic language. Jesus, Isa alayhi salam described to be dark skinned as well. So again, from that, Luqman al-Hakim was from Habasha. Some say he's a prophet, some say he was a wali of Allah. That's disputed. So again, you learn about this field. I sincerely believe, and this is where I tie it with Malcolm, that not what you see out there people practicing, but what you can learn from the faith in terms of studying the stories of the prophets who were black, and start studying the legacy of black people within Islam, from the Salaf. Ata ibn Abi Rabah was a black member of the Salaf who was a teacher of so he was someone who was senior to knowledge to Abu Hanifa, and he was one of the first people to give a fatwa against domestic violence in Islam. He was a black scholar. And you have all these other and the legacy of Africa within Islam. So ultimately, tying it back in Malcolm X in a very long-winded way, see Islam as a source of empowerment. That was what I'm trying to get to.
Yeah, like just to hone in on the example you gave of Isa alayhi salam being like darker skin, like you know how I guess the society that we live in, by virtue you see depictions of Christ being fair and white and all that sort of stuff. But the thing is, it's so crazy how subconsciously we've just like on a very deep level we've just sort of associated that Isa alayhi salam is white, and every time you get an image of him being black, it's like subconsciously you're like, nah, that's not how he looks. But you don't, it's not like explicitly like you sort of say in those words. Like, I guess we know that through the tradition that he is darker skinned, but just in representation, subconsciously you're thinking, no, that's not him. Like, oh, he's fair. You get what I mean? And that's 100%. What people like drawing onto the broader point about like white supremacy and sort of Eurocentric way of understanding things. It's so embedded subconsciously on many different levels that people don't understand.
Look at the movies that we watched growing up. The Messenger, the Umar series, the cartoons that we saw. Man. Did you see any black companions there other than Bilal?
Subhanallah.
when we know there were so many. We know that Ammar bin Yasser and Sumayya were black. We know that
Zayd, even, yeah.
Zayd,
Osama bin Zayd, yeah.
the adopted son of the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We know that Sayyidina Umar's grandfather was Ethiopian. You know, so he wasn't been fair skinned the way he was depicted. But that is legacy of white supremacy. When we went to Nigeria, even this was quite sad actually. When we went to Nigeria, I went to Nigeria 2 years ago to give a talk about my friend Mustafa Briggs gave a talk on Beyond Bilal, and I gave a talk on like Islam and 21st century. And then this is Nigeria, by the way. Nigeria, majority black people, blacker than black. This is majority, Nigeria. So we're in Nigeria, and literally we were. Oh, sorry, lots of background noise, by the way.
Yeah. I think someone's
leaf blowing outside. Yeah.
Unfortunately, my bad. Yeah.
Cool.
They don't want us to get the racism talk out to the masses. Unfortunately,
exactly.
I have to chat with them.
That leaf blower, not the person, but the actual tool itself is an agent of white supremacy, agent provocateur. No. But yeah. So when we were in Nigeria, after the talk of Beyond Bilal, this was a talk where we're telling everyone that some of the prophets were black and the companions, all this stuff. We got messages saying that, oh, you really rocked the people today. We thought the prophets were all white and beautiful. This is like black people saying this is how it permeates even within Africa. So
SubhanAllah. Yeah, people don't realize that sort of understanding how it's so embedded, and it's a job in of itself. It's not like oh, I'm just going to study Islam and the problem will undo itself, right? You've got to like firstly understand the whole subject area around race, and you have to hit the books around the scholars of race, and then actually understand it, apply it. Also there's obviously going to be moments where you have to sort of filter it through like an Islamic Aqidah sense, but that's not sort of like the prime thing you're sort of concerned about in the sense that it's not like those race scholars are out to corrupt Islam. You get what I mean? Like they just they're just doing the thing in their own field. And it's about trying to help and better the society on the ground, which unfortunately people don't see it like that.
Tanzim, I remember recently with the Ahmad ibn Hanbal series, you made a bit of a stir about that, didn't you? Or you got upset about it on Twitter.
I can't remember. What did I say?
Yeah, the series with Ahmad portraying the life of Ahmad ibn Hanbal.
Yeah. There's the series on
YouTube as well. And you made a point about the fact that Ahmad ibn Hanbal, rahimahullah, was very dark skinned.
Yep.
Yeah, he's like very white in the
but
show.
Exactly. You made a point that it was.
I made a post about this, and I think did it stir people up, or
people weren't happy with the fact that you labeled it racism. That was what I distinctly recall. That people were like, no, that was just casting. The guy was just.
No, but it's just that. Like people don't feel like they should strive to represent proper figures in our scholarship in the way that they were culturally speaking as well.
Exactly.
And it's just like the standard is just like, okay, they're white or they were white or they were fair skinned, and that's about it.
But can you imagine the opposite? The reason I didn't know what to make of it at first, Tanzim, but the reason I realized it was probably racism because I'm like, imagine the opposite had happened. Imagine they'd portrayed someone who'd been known to be light skinned,
exactly,
with a black or very dark skin.
I'll give an example. There's a famous, it's widely disputed, but there's a Jalaluddin Suyuti puts that the great polymath. He puts that Sayyidina Ali was extremely dark skinned. That's what he puts. So then the I think it's the Moorish temple, not Moorish temple. I think Ansar-ud-Din movement. They're like a black movement in America. They put out all these images of Ahlul Bayt being black. So they put images of like Sayyidina Ali and not Fatima, but Sayyidina Ali and Hassan Hussein and all the members of the Ahlul Bayt being very dark skinned, just as a depiction of them. Yeah, and the controversy was very telling. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, oh my God, how dare you put this there? But I'm saying, but none of you have an issue when we portray them to be white as white. That's not true either.
SubhanAllah. And that's literally where the discussion's at, man. Like, as people like aren't actually aware, and that's unfortunate. And I guess like, where do you start? Like, how do you counter that sort of issue? And I guess like that's what you're doing with your own sort of initiatives and projects. Yeah. And inshallah, it really makes some ground.
Do you think? Are you optimistic about making much headway in the Muslim community? Inshallah. Like, how do you feel?
Inshallah. Now, if I'm honest with you, I am. In the Muslim community, not so much, but I'm optimistic in the direction the young people are going in. I genuinely feel that the change will be with young people. And what I've seen, and especially with BLM and a lot of non-black Muslims trying to engage with me on these topics and trying to get a better understanding, and all these things have been quite positive, to be honest. And obviously, and even from the non-Muslim perspective, when I went on the BLM protest, I saw like it was literally 50-50 in terms of black people and non-black people. So that was very heartwarming to see as well. So I feel like things are changing, and things will change with next generation, slowly but surely, inshallah. And I think the Muslim community, as always, will be behind, but I think it will change as well.
Just to add quickly, it's interesting you brought like you're more focused on the younger community, because it's interesting where I'm pretty sure you may have copped this as well, where essentially like I've copped this as well, and in the sense that like much older people in the community will look to me and be like, look, you're just a young zealous kid, and essentially you'll mature up, and then they sort of discredit you in the process. And it's like, I understand that there's that kind of aspect to being the youth. At times you may get things wrong, etc. But at the same time, it's like I look to them, I'm like, I don't say it, but I'm just like, I'm very sure I've read more books than you on race when it comes to these subject areas. So it's like, how can you pass that judgment so quick? Like, I guess from your perspective, have you had the situation where people will try to discredit what you're doing now on the basis of, oh, you're just a young zealot person,
And for you are just young, you don't know what you're talking about. Oh, you're very too left, or you're too liberal. When you get older, you become more moderate. You become whatever it may be, whatever the excuse may be. And I'm thinking, well, okay, I might be wrong, but I'm still gonna grow. You definitely didn't get it right, because the issues are still here.
That's so true. Oh man. Just to add as well, we were speaking of Malcolm X before. It's interesting because I see this conversation pop up online quite a bit, where essentially when people discuss what Malcolm X went through and his past, we all know the influence of the Nation of Islam in regards to what he did. And I guess essentially he, for most of his life, I guess after like jail, he was pretty much part of NOI. And in that, what happens is the Muslim community are in two camps. So one camp will be like, no, we don't sort of, because from my angle and my personal thing is that, look, yes, we know that Elijah Muhammad was a false prophet. There's no dispute about that. However, at the same time, it's like, what people do is that they try to condemn people that try to praise the NOI in general, because from the analysis that me and you will probably come from is that they actually made so much headway when it comes to issues of race in the community. Having sort of their own autonomous businesses, for example, to essentially like tackling the issues of there was police brutality happening at that time, and they were actually addressing that sort of head on, right, and bringing the black community together and empowering them. But at the same time, a lot of the Muslim community, in the factions of the Muslim community, they're just like, oh nah, why are you praising them? It's kufr, and don't do that because Elijah Muhammad, and the conversation stops there. And I'm just like, what are you doing? Like, have you had that sort of for a lot of students of knowledge as well?
100%. Oh, student knowledge, I don't engage in this topic. They can't hack it, man. If I praise Elijah Muhammad, again, if I you can praise somebody without praising their deen. Like, praising their belief. I'm praising their social work. Like, again, okay, cool. Whether you like it or not, yes, their aqidah was wrong, but undoubtedly, the Nation of Islam normalized Islam, a lot of Islam in America. They normalized like people not drinking alcohol, for example. Muslims dressing smart, for example, cleaning up their areas, for example. All these things. And my thing is that it's all well and good, but then don't be an armchair critic. Where was the Muslim community at the time? Where was the Muslim community doing these social interventions for black people in America? Where was the immigrant community then? The irony being, the immigrant community was so scared of having Malcolm X's janazah prayed in the masjid with the repercussions. Do you see what I mean? So again, I totally praise Nation of Islam for what they did. Naturally, again, I have strong disagreements with their aqidah. However, I have friends who have grown up in the nation, by the way, and to be honest, a lot of them have rejected that Elijah Muhammad was a prophet, and have rejected that W.D. Fard was Allah incarnate, and they say that Elijah Muhammad was a Mahdi. Yeah. And if you take that line of thinking, if you're going to be classically look for the classical lens of Islam, that doesn't make, if you believe someone was a Mahdi, doesn't make you a kafir. It makes you a muqtadi, so person of innovation.
Yeah.
You see what I mean? So again, people within the Nation of Islam, there's nuance as well. And if you look at, I don't know if you realize this. There's many Nation of Islam's imams, by the way, who have studied in Azhar.
Oh, really?
Yeah, if you want to, by the way, if you ever want to watch like actually decent khutbas, watch their khutbas now. They're fluent in Arabic. They recite Quran well. They do Jum'ah, and their khutbas are fire. Obviously, I wouldn't pray there, but their khutbas are fire though.
I know. I definitely understand what you're saying about there being nuance, and I think like even those creedal issues, a lot of them later became Orthodox Muslims and paved the way for like a massive movement of scholars.
Elijah Muhammad's son,
Warith, yeah.
Warthi
Muhammad, like he was he brought so many people to Orthodox Islam, and he was, I would say he was a mujaddid, a revival of Islam in his time, 100%.
Yeah,
and he influenced people like Imam Siraj Wahaj, who's very influential as well later on. So it's set off a sort of chain reaction.
Yep.
Which has really
it's actually, you can trace it back to the NOI
and then you can argue now, because there's a lot of discussion recently. We're watching about Latin converts to Islam.
Yes.
In America, and like the surge in conversions from the Latin community. It's like a massive thing now. And how that arguably is even linked to the NOI.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Wow,
I would argue that it is, personally, because you see the work that the Nation of Islam and Islam, Islamic activism did for the communities and gave a sense of empowerment. It also gave them an alternative sort of an alternative to the sort of white Christian
100%.
elite,
And ultimately, and many of them found Orthodox Islam anyway through the nation anyway. Like, and so again, it was an entry. Alhamdulillah, we say we judge things by their end. So the door you came through might not have been the best door, but alhamdulillah, they end up at Orthodox Islam, end up at traditional Islam anyway. So alhamdulillah.
Well, people convert to Islam for the most like trivial reasons sometimes.
Exactly.
Like, I know people who laugh, sort of chuckle about taking the shahada because they're getting married to their Muslim girlfriend.
Yeah.
Or vice versa. Their Muslim girlfriend who chuckles because she's getting married to a Muslim guy and she had to take shahada.
Yeah.
Next minute, they're proper, like, mashallah, like they're much better than I could ever be.
Yes, 100%.
And they could be better in the eyes of Allah, because it's a gradual process, and they something gets through to them someday.
Yeah.
And it's the state that we die upon, really.
Exactly.
That influences where we go. And I wanted to mention that because as part of converts, like, are there a lot of converts that you encounter, and like, are a majority of the converts that you find actually like European or white, or do you find that it's in more like minority communities that Islam is more spreading?
It's maybe minority community, but I actually lived amongst the community where I was assistant director to a mosque and the Imam Khatib there. And literally, it's the first mosque in the UK that was established by a group of white converts, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And there was an awesome community. They were like a middle class white community who set up a mosque, and they were all Sufi. And literally, I lived amongst them for several years as part of that community. And then what you have is that you have second, third generation born white Muslims with the most English of surnames who are like born Muslims. Proper awesome community, man. Yeah. So yeah. In terms of converts, though, I'm trying to think. I do count a lot of converts, but they all mix. To be fair, some white, black. Yeah. So they're very mixed. Yeah.
No, because I was recently reflecting upon this, and as like a European sort of middle class convert to Islam in a Western country, I feel like I'm put up on more of a pedestal by the community, and they'll invite me to more events than, say, like a lot of the converts I know. I know a couple of French African. I'm Italian.
Oh, nice.
Italian River, yeah. So he gets a lot of panel invites to on our universities.
Well, like, I know a few French African guys.
You're using your white privilege, because obviously because honestly, it's funny. I mentioned this today. I was talking about we're talking about cultural appropriation, and I was saying to one of my friends that, you know what, to be honest, when it comes to a lot of cultural appropriation or things like, many of the times because of white supremacy, we seek validation, but it only becomes valid when white people endorse it. And many times we seek, the white gaze and the white validation, and that's the only time something becomes of worth. And many black people are affected by this. And I said, it's funny. I remember in the mosque, or when you see people who are white convert to Islam, it's almost as if now Islam is even more true because even white people are accepting it.
Yeah.
Or
The
but then the
yeah.
opposite you see is people say the opposite. When a black person converts to Islam many times, it's almost like mashallah, Islam has helped this person. Islam has taken this person away and
Mm.
helped this person, and Islam has elevated you. Whereas now, when a white person converts to Islam, Islam has become more true or elevated because even white person are engaging in it or embracing it. I've seen that many times. Like
That's exactly the
I see
experience. Yeah.
these. I'm sorry, but I see these. You see these videos in it, like these videos of look at the video, look at the videos of when a white person recite. I see it all the time. A white person that goes viral reciting the Quran, he's put on a pedestal. He's invited to all the masajid. He is like the imam of this place, and mashallah, he recites great. And then you see the viral video of a black person reciting Quran. What does it say? Mashallah, this hip hop looking guy reciting Quran.
Oh yeah. So, I remember like there was this famous like viral video. It's like
yeah.
I think it was a African American brother that was like wearing just a t-shirt, and then everyone's like, "Wow, he's reciting Quran."
Yeah,
and it was just, I'm like, bro, like, does he look like a gangster or something? Like he's
exactly,
just wearing a t-shirt. You know what I mean? That's the problem. Like, there's all these assumptions and baggages that just come out,
exactly.
and it's just such a shame. You know what I mean?
Like, why is it so shocking to see a black person reciting Quran? Like, what's the shock about it?
But even in the masjid, people will come up like, actually, they don't to me because I kind of look like Arab. So,
yeah,
people don't really be like, hey. But as soon as I'm like Italian, they're like, oh, wow, mashallah. People start gathering around and that. Whereas, like, yeah, if, as I said, I know a couple of, Asian Australians who've converted to Islam. 2 French African brothers who converted to Islam. And yeah, that they'd never elicit the same response from like the kind of Muslim main. Yeah, that's unfortunate, but it's definitely true. Like
100%. I mean, me as a student of knowledge who's studying and teaching. Obviously, I'm not a scholar or nothing, but I'm nowhere near there. But I'm an aspiring scholar. I can go to a masjid, which is a majority Pakistani masjid, and I've happened to me several occasions where people were offered to teach me how to do wudu. Based on nothing other than seeing my skin color. Do you see what I mean?
Oh, wait till they see the way you pray, then they're gonna.
Exactly. This guy definitely doesn't know how to pray. He's definitely a new Muslim. I remember I walked into a masjid to pray Asr with one of my friends, a Pakistani guy, and wallahi, the guy came over, shook hands with my Pakistani friend, and looked at me up and down, and just smiled and said, "MashaAllah." I'm thinking, what the hell? Like, what? Have you never seen a black Muslim before? Like, what's going on?
That's literally like the state of, I don't know how or when this sort of sentiments are going to change. Like, that's the thing. Like, it goes back to what you're saying, like focusing on the youth, because at the end of the day, they're going to be the ones that will end up growing up and sort of having this kind of influence and positions of power within the community. So it's about focusing on them. And like, as much as I hate to say, like, the old people, they're not going to live for too long. So you know what I mean? It's about changing the sort of youth and their sort of thinking and their sort of sentiments in regards to these issues.
As a white person as well, like, I feel like we have to
white guy.
Like I always keep thinking about that hadith in my head, like the idea about racism being tied with jahiliyyah. So it's like, well, I probably am racist. I probably have had at times in my life sort of subconscious racist sentiments, like you do by definition growing up in a European family in the Western context.
We all do. Yeah. I mean, as Dr. Cornel West said so eloquently. He said, a white person came up to him and said that, Dr. Cornel West, I'm not racist. I've transcended race. I don't see color, all these things. And Dr. Cornel West says that if I'm a black man who's still affected by white supremacy, but I not even in terms of like affected negatively, in the sense that it still affects me. The way I view the world is through the white supremacy lens. I'm sure as hell you as a white person still affected by it. You know what I mean? Yeah. Even me, like like code switching, for example, or trying to sound more white in some places, or all these, whatever that means. Like, even the concept of sounding more white is equated to speaking better English. Is is these things as well. That's a legacy, a remnant of white supremacy that I'm still affected by. So.
What's interesting, because Rafael isn't on Twitter as much, and you and I are, and we're pretty much in Muslim Twitter. So like, what you'll see is that when it comes to like, there's sort of long Twitter threads in regards to people going back and forth about race and racism, and you would have seen it, right? And essentially, what happens is like some Muslims that try to see, go down the rabbit hole. I don't see color and this
Yeah.
that, and then they sort of like, why do you hate white people so much? Like, you know what I mean? Like, they ask those questions and they sort of feel sorry about, like, white people. It's like, no, we don't have to get angry about this sort of race issues. I'm sorry that you get demonized white people. And it's really interesting because, like, Rafael is literally Italian, so then people get really confused, like, people of those sentiments, like, there's actually a white guy acknowledging all this,
No, I just don't get it, man. I don't get when people are like that, because it's like, at the end of the day, bro, like, why do you feel sorry for people who colonized, like, who benefited from the privileges of plundering your people?
I just don't get it. I do get it. It's the legacy of white supremacy. It really is that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't, and I feel like it's such a shame when a lot of the Muslims are willingly or willfully ignorant, are kind of signing up to right-wing talking points. And I find it
of course.
Like, you're actually regurgitating the right wing's talking points, even knowingly or unknowingly. But I'm like, do you not know how you sound? Like this, you sound like a far right extremist right now, literally. And I know this. I'm sorry, but I feel very strongly about this thing of like, oh well, I hear this all the time. Well, the right will. I've literally seen this on Muslim Twitter. Well, the right will only inflict physical harm on you, whereas the left will mess up your deen forever. I'm like, huh?
Yeah,
I don't get that either. I never understood it. I'm a cultural Marxist though, so how am I ever going to understand that?
I've heard that, even though that doesn't mean anything. But anyway, it was happening as well.
That's great. Like you're mentioning right-wing talking points. Like, you and I would be very familiar with some scholars sort of going down that sort of route, and I think at times you've also had a back and forth with them. So how do you make sense of that as well when scholars sort of do that? How do you approach that? I'm sure like you'd get called lefty, liberal, whatever that means, and because the same argument will be said about what we say to them would be said about you, like, oh, you're just regurgitating whatever the left say, and the rabid cancel culture, whatever, this, that. So how do you sort of navigate that as well?
I think it's a fair criticism, and people can criticize me however they want. I just strive to have some nuance. I mean, I'm not completely like, I don't believe everything the left says, for example. I don't agree with everything the left says. I don't like cancel culture, for example, just as a person, and all these things. But the issue I find with a lot of these scholars, especially in America, for them, they see it as this like, okay, let's keep it 100%. It seems that they have reduced the dangers of the left to the LGBT movement, which I find very strange. Like, I get again, Islam has its view on homosexuality, and we can speak about that all day. But I don't understand why you've reduced, like, okay, they've reduced, but one of the main criticisms of BLM, but it was started by 3 queer women, and what? They support trans rights. Okay, but we're not in support with them, or whether you are or not, whatever, that's another discussion. But our cause of coming together is not trans rights. Our cause of coming together is black issues right now. So I don't. But literally all the time I've seen that these people talking about, but the liberal left will make you lose your deen. What is it? Oh, you accept homosexuality. I'm like, is that it? Like, I literally,
that's the right wing talking point. That's the thing, right? That's the right wing talking point as well.
No, but it's almost like, if you talk about racism in a structural sense, and if you talk about white supremacy, then you must also, like, in 2 generations, all our kids are going to be gay because of you. Like, it's all conflated the same. Yeah,
that's what it sounds like. You hear things like, but the left wants to destroy the family. I'm like, in a religion that accepts polygamy, what concept of nuclear family do we have?
Yeah, exactly.
When do we have nuclear family doesn't exist for us? Like, I'm so confused.
And that's exactly the point I want to hone on. Is like they're not aware of the nuances at all to this discussion, right?
Yeah.
Like they don't understand, like, even the concept of the nuclear family. They just use it willy-nilly, right? But that's sort of just it's evident that they are not nuanced in the way that they should be in.
Well,
it
just means that they've absorbed that discourse. Like, they're not actually coming from an authentic Islamic discourse when they start talking about, like, the nuclear family. It's like you're not coming from a position of like, how do I be faithful to Islam? How do I true to Islam? They're coming from literally the right-wing conservative propaganda.
Literally. But the right wing wants to, but you lefties are promoting abortion. But our fiqh, we have fiqh rulings that allow abortion up into 12. Like, you know what I mean? Like, my point is that, okay, if my thing is this. If you want to criticize the left or you want to criticize liberalism, which is, please feel free to do so. But and your starting point is, I'm criticizing it because I am a Muslim from an Islamic lens. Then be truthful and faithful to our Islamic tradition. Criticize it from our tradition. Don't criticize it using right-wing talking points. Because that, for me, that's when you lost me. From the minute you say, and I've seen people say this, that Islam is inherently more aligned to the right of politics. I'm like, no, it's not. And if it is, then prove it.
Exactly. And people when I've, like, for example, you and I know Yassir Morsi relatively well, in the sense that, you know, a lot of people like try to pigeonhole him in a certain light, like, oh, promoting liberalism, but then it just exposes that they don't actually know his works or they haven't read it, because he's actually trying to critique both the left and the right and the liberals, in the sense that, you know, whiteness plays in the way that, you know, liberalism exists in society, where people are just using the cliche, oh, let's all come together, let's all fight for this cause, but then it's always under the scope of whiteness, in the sense that they want you to be, you know, pigeonholed in a certain way within society, and he's actually critiquing that as well, to give us that sort of ample or that sort of armor as Muslims, in order to be true to our faith in a society that actually sort of shapes you to be as, you know, white as possible, if that makes sense. So 100%. This is the critique of liberalism, and they don't realize that, which is a shame. You know what I mean?
You know, they definitely understand. These people, a lot of these guys, they strawman the argument. When you strawman the argument, it's easy to dismiss it. I mean, the thing is, like, how I don't understand people who will maybe diss me as a liberal, and my teachers are not teachers, my inspirations and people I learned from are people likes of like Malcolm X, James Baldwin. They were some of the harshest critics of liberalism, of neoliberalism. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'm not some raving crazy liberal. Like, literally, Malcolm X, you know, the ballot or the bullet was talking about, you know, literally liberal movement and the neoliberal disasters that will come. That, you know, neoliberalism just literally likes to put a plaster of the issue but never the symptoms. James Baldwin was the same. So again, but to be fair, to let's be fair to the discussion, Twitter and social media isn't a place for nuance, is it? So we're never going to have a nuanced discussion of these topics anyway.
That's definitely true. But I guess, like, at the end of the day, for me, and, you know, as well for yourself, it's just more putting the ideas out there, doing the best we can, and inshallah, you know, people can benefit from it, and if not, then, you know, we try to influence the youth, as you said. That's what you're sort of trying to do with your initiatives.
Yeah, we develop our understandings as well. That's the most important thing to start with.
I might ask maybe a last question to sort of wrap up the episode, because we sort of have to head off. However, did you have a sort of final thoughts around, you know, mashallah, you know, we've covered a lot of diverse topics, and I really, really enjoyed this discussion. It's much needed.
Too. Thank you for having me on.
And yeah, alhamdulillah. And I'm so glad I was able to get this going. At the same time, like, did you have any sort of final thoughts in regards to, you know, any topic or any sort of takeaway points for the listeners?
I just feel like, I think it's, to be fair, as we've said it all, to be fair, I'll just reiterate that, as I assume your audience is majority Muslim, please, like, just be, again, not in the dismissive way, but kind of, you know, and I hate using this term sometimes, but yeah, literally it's cliche, but just get woke. Do you know what I mean? Not in the sense of like, oh, become some, like, oh, some, you know, some engaging kind of performative activism, but literally in the sense that learn of the world around you. Don't compromise your faith. Be strong in your faith. Learn your faith, but don't be a hermit in your faith and refuse to engage in the world around you. That's what I would say.
Yeah, that's a really great talking sort of takeaway point, in the sense that, because as I mentioned a lot earlier in the episode, is that what we tend to do is pigeonhole things as, you know, Islam and un-Islam, you know what I mean, and that's it. Like, we only stick to this Islamic knowledge, and then we don't step outside of this, because, I don't know, social science, they don't factor in your aqidah, so you should stay away from it because it might cause deviancy. Like, that sort of line of thinking seems to be a bit more apparent in certain circles. But at the end of the day, man, like, as our tradition has never been like, oh, you know, there's this knowledge that exists, we shouldn't touch it because it's batil. Like, I've never seen that sort of rhetoric from the polymaths.
Well, I mean,
exactly.
From some of the hardcore Hanabila, they're like, oh, ilm al-kalam, like, you gotta stay away.
That's a different
But like, it's kind of the same as that. Like, that doesn't represent the entire Islamic tradition. And it's really funny because I meet like Ashaira and people who are engaged in kalam and dawah through that means, who then take the same attitude as like the hardcore Salafis do to certain philosophical and theological positions and questions, with things such as racial theory, as the people who they criticize for being ignorant in theology or philosophy.
Yep.
And it's crazy because it tells you a lot about how much of it comes down to stubbornness, to personality. And unfortunately, it's having, and it's not just something theoretical here, like cosmological arguments. It affects everyday lives of people. And I think it's so important that all of us, regardless of background, not only understand the deen, but understand the situation and the conditions that are currently being experienced by our brothers and sisters in Islam.
100%. And just to ask, I guess, the final question, we always ask this question to all the guests that come on the show. So if you had to pick 3 people to hang out with in a cave, who would it be? Like, it can be like, so the rule is that you can't pick Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam or the Sahaba, because everyone's going to pick them anyway. So we want a sort of diverse sort of answer. So who's the 3 people that you'd like to hang out with in a cave, have a discussion with them or some banter, whatever it may be?
Okay, obviously Malcolm X, obviously.
Yeah.
That's a given. Who would be my other 2 people? Probably, Malcolm X. Who else?
You can take your time with it. I've had worse situations where the guest told me to pause for 15 minutes to come up with a response. So it's all right.
There's so many. I'm trying to think.
Yeah, exactly.
So 3 is difficult, man. Okay, cool. Malcolm X. Definitely, I would. You know who I really like? I like Saint Augustine.
Oh, really?
Yes, I like him a lot. I find his confessions quite insightful. So yeah, Saint Augustine, the Christian. So Malcolm X, Saint Augustine, and one more. Who would I chill in a cave? Maybe like if it's like a Muslim or non-Muslim, it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
And see, the funny thing, I'll be honest with you, naturally I love Imam Malik, and people be like, oh yeah, Imam Malik, but if I'm honest with you, he was a very he doesn't seem like he'll be a cool person to chill with. Like, he seems very
don't you think he's like, I'd be so scared of him if I reading the stories.
He wasn't like, you hear about his duros. You hear about his duros, and you feel like he was very strict. He came in, sat and talked. Whereas Abu Hanifa now, he had banter in his duros. Abu Hanifa was known for his banter. He would tease his students and stuff. So
Imam Malik told off the caliph who came to one of his
exactly like he didn't do things. So I'm I'll be
still on the floor.
Like, I was thinking, imagine all these scholars were on Twitter today. Imam Malik would be very much, you ask him questions, very like, yes, it's halal, no, it's haram. Like, very much like, it'll be very yes and no.
Rafael, he would be a choleric temperament then, yeah. Like, can you sort of pick out the temperament?
Choleric, 100% choleric, 100% choleric. But yeah, okay, to finish in it, I will put so Saint Augustine, Malcolm X, and probably Ibn Hazm.
Ooh, Ibn Hazm.
Yes.
Why Ibn Hazm, man?
Ibn Hazm was such a thorn in the side of the Malikis in Islamic Spain, and I like people who go against the grain a lot of the time. And he was, he was just a funny story. Like, he would, there was like concubines. Obviously, there was certain concubines that people did not buy, like they called them the dancing ones, and he would go out of his way to go and buy them. To make a point, like, I don't care what the side says, I'm gonna go against the side. So he was a bit of a maverick as well.
He was. So I really like that about him. I love him because like he's Latin as well, so I have that connection with him because
of course.
So me and my Latin brethren, Ibn Hazm, his whole thing about women as well. Like he wrote a lot of poetry apparently about women that really reflects that kind of Latin romanticism.
Yeah, 100%.
I remember one of the rather like ilmi guys was talking about like, I actually respect Ibn Hazm, just we'll leave that women thing at the door, like we don't have to talk about that, but the rest of him is amazing. That's so cool, man. I've never heard anyone say Ibn Hazm.
I'm a massive fan, man. I love Ibn Hazm's work, man. I love his work. I love the fact that he was like, I feel like ultimately people see him as like a thorn in the Malikis, and they're like happy, and people praising when he died and whatever, but ultimately he made the Malikis like step their game up.
Absolutely,
yeah.
MashaAllah. That was I really loved this discussion. We really like, it was probably one of the most laid back kind of discussions I've had, but whereas we still talked about very pertinent issues and did it in good with good banter involved. So jazakallah khair.
No pleasure, man. Thanks for having me, man. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Anytime. Like one of the things that I do want to do is essentially like I haven't been Hajj yet. Inshallah, when I do go Hajj, like the next place I do really want to go is UK, because like we made a lot of good friends, like me and Rafael, and people based in UK. Like I think you're familiar with Momodou Taal, for example, Ustad.
Yeah, that's my boy, man.
So yeah. So he's a friend of ours, alhamdulillah, and because he does classes, he came to Sydney, and I've met him. We've done a few episodes with him as well.
Yeah, he makes the trek out here, so you have no excuse.
Inshallah, one day.
Inshallah. And even from our end, like we really do want to go UK and meet up with you guys and link up. And man, it would be really good to have these kind of discussions as well. Further
100%.
Our sort of discussions.
100%. Please, if you want to come to the UK, please do. If you want to, if you're ever in Egypt as well, I'm going back to Egypt soon. Come through to Egypt. You always got a place to stay, inshallah.
Oh, appreciate it, man. Definitely. Rafael, are you going to Al-Azhar anytime soon? Inshallah. I'll wrap it up there. So for our listeners, thank you for giving us your attention. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to email us at info@boysinthecave.com. And you can also find us on Facebook. We're on Instagram, Twitter. Alhamdulillah, we really appreciate, the engagement. And also don't forget to leave a 5-star rating on iTunes, because that's where, people will see the comments, and we're able to go up the rankings through your sort of feedback as well, and through the 5 stars, inshallah. And at the same time, we do, very importantly, we do have a $5 Patreon WhatsApp chat where there's literally like a lot of our guests. Rafael, how does the chat feel? It's pretty good, the WhatsApp chat.
Honestly, it's a marvel to behold. Donate to the Patreon and you'll see what I mean. Like,
because we actually add in a lot of our guests. Actually, asked all my guests to hop in, and then you have all our fans as well in there.
It's a pretty crazy cave, Tanzim. Yeah, like if you had them all in the cave at the same time.
Literally, alhamdulillah, a lot of insights as well. So, check out our Patreon page, $5 Patreon, and inshallah, donate through there, and I can just add you to the chat, inshallah. So, from our special guest, Momodou Taal, my co-host, Rafael, and myself, we wish you all the best. This is Tanzim signing off. Assalamu alaikum.